As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Is it possible for the Israelis and the American military to just take out the Iranian nuclear program and that's that?
I do not think so, but that is the talking point we hear. Like I remember Tom Cotton said that recently in a hearing, and you see people who support this idea of bombing Iran, acting like it'll be no big deal. But I think it's very clear, if they take that step, because, what it would take to try to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities would be dropping the U.S.'s heaviest bunker busting bombs. They're like 30,000 pounds because they built these facilities deep underground because in anticipation of something like this happening. So if the U.S. goes out and drops those bombs on that, they're going to respond. And the fact is that they have advanced ballistic missiles that can hit, I believe, about 10 U.S. bases in the region, probably more. And as this is something Tucker's been talking about a lot lately. The Pentagon assessments are like hundreds or thousands of American casualties. And then what happens? Is Trump just going to be like, oh, well, that's that? No, then it's going to become an even bigger war. I don't really see a situation where the U.S. tries to invade Iran. It's just not realistic. Nobody has the will. None of the people in the U.S. have the will. The U.S. military doesn't have the will. Where are they going to invade from? But I could see just really heavy bombing, maybe some ground fighting in Iraq or something, until somebody says, all right, enough. I guess we just got to negotiate here or something. But it's just, there's no way that the U.S. just takes out the nuclear facilities and that's it.
It reminds me even, right, Douglas Murray said to me when I pointed out that the war in Afghanistan was not just about taking out Al-Qaeda, but that we launched a 20-year regime change war against the Taliban. And he goes, well, you got dragged into the quicksand of war. And it's right. Yeah, that's right. That sure can happen. Not if you if you look at the original, authorization of use of military force against Iraq, it was very narrow to take out Saddam Hussein. We took out Saddam Hussein very quickly, but then we were there for another 2 decades, and I guess still have some military forces there today. Even at the beginning of the Ukraine war, Joe Biden was very clear that the Ukraine can win with sanctions, that we could support them just with sanctions. That was supposed to be the extent of American involvement. And you just see this all over the place. So the idea that, right, we're going to just bomb the crap out of Iran, but that'll be it. Man, you want to talk about risky games. That is a risky one. And as you said, it just seems like it would be a situation where they would have to really respond. And if they really responded, then how the hell are we not going to really respond to that? Again, just try to even imagine, there was, after Trump killed Soleimani, there was some restraint showed on both sides of that. And look, you could say, killing Soleimani was probably one of the worst things Donald Trump ever did, just in terms of how risky a move it was. But then you could also say that one of the best things he ever did was just leave it at that and not, respond any further. But if you could just run a counterfactual in your head and imagine that the Iranian retaliatory strike had killed 10 U.S. servicemen. Is it possible that Donald Trump would have? I certainly don't think so. I don't think there's any world in which Mr. Tough Guy Donald Trump, with all of his Miriam Adelson money and all of the neocon hawks that he has around him, it would possibly be able to say, you're going to just let them kill 10 U.S. soldiers and not have a bigger response to that. And so this is, the quicksand of war, as even neocon Douglas Murray would call it. You just see it right in front of you. And again, for what benefit are we even playing with this game? So that the country of Iran, that poses no threat to any of us, might continue to pose no threat to any of us? It's just, it's madness.
I hesitate to do this. This is a sensitive photo, but this happened yesterday, and it's heartbreaking. The 2,000-pound bombs that Trump sent to Israel just did this. Now, it's a mother holding her murdered daughter. You can see the blood. Don't look if you are squeamish. But the fact is, that was our bomb. That is a bomb that Trump just sent. And this is what it did: destroyed the life of this mother and, of course, of the daughter. So an absolutely failed, cruel, inhuman policy. And it's hard to believe that more American conservatives, pro-life conservatives, are not standing up and saying enough.
When this recent bombing was started up again, they had pictures of the president stuck with the TV set, watching it.
Yeah,
it was sort of like, boy, look at that type of attitude. That is so sad, so unnecessary. But what the American people have trouble with, if we charge, and I do, that we all have a responsibility for this, all Americans do, because it's your money, our money, and we should do what we can to stop this. And we heard some information coming out from the candidates on the Republican side that they intend to stop this, but it is disappointing when it doesn't stop. It continues, and more money. Just think the number of dollars we've reported on that, how many dollars that's going to contribute to the deficit. So I think those are some of the things that they haven't really touched it at all. Or, is the deficit, the monetary policy on inflation, and control of interest rates, tariffs up there for grabs, and they're debating. But those things can cancel out their celebration. But I don't think they realize that. I mentioned this thing about complacency of the American people, not assuming responsibility, because this system we have is set up where we should have a say. And I think, there's a bit of benefit from this. I think the sentiment was very positive in changing policies with COVID. And I think some of the good things we talked about on Trump comes about because the people are awakening to this. But the complexity of this is something that is more difficult to sort out when you look at special interests. When you look at a plane goes down, and we would make fun. Who cares? Who do the big guys care about? Look at a new order tomorrow. And there wasn't a list of people that benefit from all this spending. And it's for weapons that are not necessary for our defense. It's destroying our currency, and it's destroying the results of this. And I don't see how, unless we change major changes in our moral and financial institutions, how we can last that much longer, because people are going to get disgusted with us. And the time we were trying to stop that war in the Middle East, it, to me, was a witness, because they did not have that vote immediately, because the people did not want us to do that. And that went on for more than a year, maybe 2 years of propaganda. And finally they had to vote because, Saddam Hussein had a nuke and he was killing babies and doing all kinds of things. So the sentiment of the people. So that to me is information, and getting information out to people, because I think if you could blot out, this contest between Republicans and Democrats and just say, well, you think we should tax you to take money to buy bombs and kill babies? And do it on purpose, hit the hospitals. And nobody's going to say, oh, yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea, because that makes us safe. It just doesn't make any sense. So I think the effort to get our information out, and that's why the attack on the First Amendment is so disastrous if we don't do anything about that. The one thing that is nice to think about is the solution is not complicated. It's a good solution. It's morally correct, and that is protecting the personal liberty of every single person equally. And believe me, we can usher in peace and prosperity with those conditions.
You said this week, got a lot of attention. You were at your cabinet meeting. You said, quote, I'm going to quote what you said, maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30.
Yeah.
And maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally. Are you saying that your tariffs will cause some prices to go up?
No, I think the tariffs are going to be great for us because it's going to make us rich.
But you said some dolls are going to cost more. Isn't that an acknowledgement that some prices will go up?
I don't think a beautiful baby girl that's 11 years old needs to have $30. I think they can have $3 or $4 because what we were doing with China was just unbelievable. We had a trade deficit of hundreds of billions of dollars with China.
When you say they could have $3 instead of $30, are you saying Americans could see empty store shelves?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they don't need to have $30. They can have 3. They don't need to have 250 pencils. They can have 5.
This is retarded bullshit. This is just ridiculous. It's ridiculous on so many goddamn levels. First of all, it's like, you can't have it both ways, dude. You can't say that, like, maybe you only need $2, you don't need $500 or whatever, but then also go, oh no, but it's not going to raise prices at all. It's like, which one are you talking about here? I also, by the way, I find this in a weird way to be kind of an interesting topic. This is something that I've talked a lot about with like close friends and family members about just how we get our kids too much stuff these days. And like, I do feel like my house is just like covered in toys. And I was like, maybe in some way, like if my kids had less toys, they'd appreciate the ones they have more, something like that. But that's a very different conversation than a conversation about a government policy that makes it more expensive to get your kids toys. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, Rob. But if you look at the amount, like since the lockdowns and the price inflation that followed the insane monetary policy of 2020, 2021, credit card debt skyrocketed. Like a lot of families are buying those dolls on the credit card. Also, there are families that the difference won't be having $30 or having 2. There's families that currently have 2, that the answer will be have 0, which maybe would have been a better question, for Kristen Walker to ask. Like, how about that? How about if it's the difference between now your kid doesn't get to play with a doll? I don't know, dude. I mean, this is just, to me, to try to sell this and not spin it as like, look, this is the cost. I'm going to be honest with you. These are the negatives that are associated with this policy, but here's what I think the benefits are. But to spin this as this is a benefit, and of all people, for Donald Trump to be spinning it, it's like, I'm sorry. I just can't defend this. This is too ridiculous. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's a very funny observation. I hadn't even thought about that, of Trump preaching people on that they don't need to consume in excess. My thought was a little bit different, that, Trump picked a very good example here, because when he says, hey, your kid will have 3 toys instead of 30, I think we can all go, oh yeah, if my kid needs to have less toys and there's an American job for him to have the less toys, maybe that's a worthwhile trade-off. And so he picked a very good example for selling it. She asked a great first question. She didn't ask the right follow-up question, which is, are you acknowledging that prices are going to go up? Because now, what happens if prices are going up on things that aren't toys? What if we're talking about not being able to buy a washer and dryer? What if we're talking about not being able to buy clothes? And then how much central planning do we want in our government? Where are we going to figure out what goods are considered excess goods that the government can decide we're going to put tariffs on those? And then there are going to be other favored industries that don't have the tariffs because the government can understand, hey, you being able to consume this, such as a car, you need a car to get to work.
Right. And like, maybe we could break them down by essential and non-essential goods, Rob.
Which already is kind of happening. I read this article. Firstly is, for car manufacturers, the increase in cost, I think, was expected to be $6,000. And so Trump temporarily has halted the tariffs on, some base items, such as like steel. And so because General Motors was able to lobby the government and that it would affect their business, they're now preferred industry. What about every small business owner that can't actually get Donald Trump's ear and explain, hey, you didn't give me enough notice on this. You're ruining my business. I don't have enough time to make these adjustments. Yep. And so to me, part of the tariff just speaks to, do you want central planning in the economy? Do you want the president to be able to say, these are goods that you should not have in excess, so we're going to tariff them. These are important goods, or these are favored industries. There's not going to be a tariff on it. And then what's going to be the fallout from, the market versus central planning? This is a president saying, hey, I don't think it's important for you to be able to consume blank amount of this item. Now, the 2 that he wants to tell you about is pencils and dolls. But what other items are you going to see price increases on? Are those ones that will be vastly more detrimental to your lifestyle? And then what? Does he make an adjustment down the line? Did he not foresee it?
Yeah.
What does those adjustment periods look like? This is all just the stupidity of central planning.
Yeah. I don't know. Tariffs are bad economics. If you want to make an argument that they can be used as a leveraging tool to get a better outcome, okay, fine. But then your whole argument hinges on the outcome. But the tariffs themselves are just a bad policy, and for this reason, that raises prices, and that makes life harder for middle class and working class people, destroys poor people. And yeah, it doesn't matter that much to rich people. That's the truth. Okay, so that's number 1. Have a real, open, transparent investigation into what the hell happened on October 7th and tell the truth. Don't go around spreading all types of horror propaganda trying to make October 7th seem worse than it was. What really were the failures here? And if you had that, what they would have come up with is that the Netanyahu government embarked on an explicit policy of propping up this ruthless terrorist organization so that they could deny the Palestinian people a state. And then they totally underestimated the threat of Hamas. They thought they could control the height of the flame. Turns out they weren't able to. So what you'd want to do, rather than not protecting your border and propping up a terrorist organization right next door, stop doing both of those things. Protect your borders and stop propping up Hamas. After that, I think, look, I've never suggested that Israel was supposed to respond to October 7th with zero violence. And that there would be I don't think it's practical to expect just about any government to have a response that involves zero violence. However, Israel had a long history of dealing with the terrorism problem through targeted assassinations and special operations and intelligence operations. They never treated the terrorism problem amongst Palestinians as a problem for the regular old army, just bomb cities. That was never how it worked until Benjamin Netanyahu came into power. And so, yeah, I would argue that Israel had an opportunity. As I've made this point before, I know sometimes people think this is a little like hippie-ish or something like that, but I don't think it is. And if you recall, after 9/11, after 9/11, they had these huge candlelight vigils for the victims of 9/11 in Tehran. Across the Muslim world, there were lots of people who felt terrible for America. And if we had just fought the war on terrorism with special operations forces, as we did in the months following 9/11, which is what took out most of the Al-Qaeda cells in Afghanistan. And if we had done that and then caught Osama bin Laden in Tora Bora and then wrapped up the whole thing by New Year's Eve of 2001, we could have maintained the moral high ground in that. But instead, we launched multiple 20-year occupations and killed hundreds of thousands of people. And then we were left with, instead of a few hundred bin Ladenites, tens of thousands of them, and hatred across the Muslim world. And Israel could have, like, everything you see about global opinion turning on Israel didn't have to be this way. Israel could have taken this opportunity to go, like, look, we're going to have this transparent investigation. We're going to admit that we made a huge mistake by propping up this terrorist group so that we would never have to give Palestinians their independence. And we could have said, right now, we're going to do that. We're going to take our boot off the neck. We're going to end the blockade. We're going to end the occupation, but we're not doing that unless we get our hostages back. And if there are any more rockets coming in, then we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We're going to make sure that we let the world know that we do value Palestinian life, and we'll make sure we're not going to kill an unnecessary amount of people. Like, again, I'm just spitballing here. I'm not a fucking expert, but there were alternatives where Israel didn't convince the world that they were the monsters that the world is seeing right now.
Well, in regards to not having to answer that question, Douglas Murray refused to answer for why is Israel justified in killing kids and civilians. And he mostly lied and said they have not. It's most of the damage that you've witnessed was booby trapping done by Gaza. And that, of course, they always like to say Israel doesn't target. Well, they seem to hit a lot of it. So I don't know what that means when you keep going, well, it's not our intention. Well, if you explode a building with kids in it, it might not be your intention to kill all the kids in it, but it will be the natural byproduct of what you're doing.
Yes.
So it doesn't really help to say it's not our intention. But speaking to, go after the leadership. There's money, there's influence, there's people who are making money off of what's going on over there. And they quite specifically, while taking food aid, decided to continue to send money, which is the most fungible of all goods. So, if every single item that goes into Gaza can't go in there because it can be used as a weapon, if someone can explain how money can't then be converted into weapons through the tunnel. Oh, the tunnels with Egypt. Well, my guess is the money is what helps those operate at the highest capacity and is what actually makes the most amount of weaponry available. I don't think it's the food that you send in.
We want to go back to some foreign policy today, and I want to talk about Gaza because it makes me sick. Israel approves plans to occupy Gaza, control aid distribution.
Yeah, well, Israel's just saying out loud what everyone's known for months at least, which is that they want to completely occupy and flatten Gaza and get rid of all the people that live there. And it feeds conspiracy theories, which are probably true, which is that this has nothing to do with October 7th, the attack that Hamas did on Israel. And this was the plan all along. A lot of people say, well, you could hear a flea. That's how it surveilled Gaza was before. How did they not respond for 7 hours and let all this stuff happen? And then when they did respond, the Samson option, I guess it was, or what's the other one called, where they are killing their own people, was obviously a pretext for what's happening. Now put up this first link. Now this is Dave DeCamp at Antiwar.com. Wrote this summary of what's happening. They've just announced it. They said we're gonna occupy the whole place. The Israeli government has approved plans to expand the genocidal war on Gaza that Israeli officials say will lead to the full Israeli military occupation of Palestinian territory. The plan involves capturing more territory in Gaza, expanding the so-called buffer zone where the IDF has demolished virtually every structure, and forcibly displacing Palestinian civilians to move them to a small area of southern Gaza. Now, what that means, of course, is occupying everything. Remember when that first hospital was bombed? Do you remember that? And it was outrageous. How dare anyone suggest that they did it on purpose? Well, since then, they've bombed every single hospital that's left, and they don't even try to pretend that it's something outrageous anymore. So this is what's happening. Now go to the next one. Axios is reporting that the plan involves flattening every single building that remains in Gaza and forcing the entire population into a single area and pressuring them to leave as part of an ethnic cleansing plan. Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich said Israel is finally going to occupy the Gaza Strip and was no longer afraid of the word occupation. So it's very clear. It's ethnic cleansing. That's what they want to do. And frankly, I think, Dr. Paul, if any other country was doing this on earth, we probably would be bombing them, as we tend to do, but not in this case. Trump, unfortunately, is backstopping them.
And right now, I think the noise has shifted. They're not talking about, just a segment. They're not talking about a couple hundred terrorists. What they do is say that they have to clear the area of Hamas militants. You know what a militant must be? And that must be somebody that's defending his home and trying to save his kids. So that to me is bad news. But if these are the militants or if they're the terrorists, is there any indication that what we have to take care of? Because believe me, there are some terrorists on both sides, and there's some terrorists, because the whole situation, when a country or or a people that is not allowed to be called a people are surrounded and they live with those bombs, they would become militant.
Yeah.
You know, I think I'd become militant too if I was put up with that.
Your homeland, yeah.
Yeah, homeland, right.
Well, go to that next clip. This is the Axios report says that President Trump isn't pushing for a ceasefire deal. That's not a surprise. And, quote, has effectively given Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a green light to do as he sees fit. And what he does see fit to do is, of course, get rid of every building. The approval of the plan to take over Gaza comes after 2 months of a total Israeli blockade on the Strip, as children are starving to death due to the lack of aid. According to CBS News, the plan includes a mechanism to have a private security company distribute aid in Gaza, but there's no indication it will be implemented soon or that it would provide the relief needed to stave off a massive famine. And the thing that's most frustrating, Dr. Paul, is that one phone call could end this. President Trump could call Netanyahu and say, look, I'm tired of seeing kids starving to death. I know you got to deal with people who've attacked you. That's fine. Don't take it out on the kids. If you don't end the siege of the aid right now, all of our aid to you will end. That would finish it. It just would take a phone call. And it wouldn't make Israel any less secure to give a kid a meal than they are now. Well, you know what's sick, Dr. Paul? Randy Fine is actually laughing and encouraging the starvation. Put this up, Representative Fine from Florida. He says, hey, Muslim terrorists, cry harder. And then he uses a hashtag, starve away. This is a member of the United States House of Representatives laughing and mocking people who are starving to death. Go to the next one. This is Randy Fine. This is the member of the U.S. House of Representatives. And sadly, I have to say, Dr. Paul, I looked it up. He was endorsed by the National Right to Life Committee, right? Right to life. And here's the people who he's laughing and mocking. And I hate to do this, but I'm going to put up this little girl. Very heartbreaking. She's starving to death, and she's looking at a picture of herself back when she was not starving to death. And she said, the thing I miss most is my hair. Very, very sad. And this is the person that Randy Fine is laughing at and mocking, saying starve harder. So we clearly have a problem here in the United States as well.
It makes it sadder when they take this pretense and they turn it, and it's back to this thing. They're not people. They're not a people. And we've talked about that. Yeah. They're not killing people. Yeah. And they're not a people per se. They don't have rights. This is so sad.
And that's what Hitler did. You know, he demonized Jews and said they're not really a people. They're just animals. And that's how he justified killing them. You think that they would know better. And thankfully, we talked about it yesterday, but not on the show. Thankfully, there are thousands and millions of Jewish people in the world who do not agree with this. Who, you know, I think hundreds of them signed a letter. We were going to talk about it yesterday. We wouldn't have time. Hundreds of them, rabbis.
Yes. And they were all Jewish groups.
Yeah.
And you saw the page on the New York Post.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The New York Post. And, because you know what? They have won the battle to intimidate if you are, pro-life and you don't like these wars, into saying, oh, you're anti-Semitic. Yeah. And that goes on in the universities. Yeah. Just think of how they try to kick people out of school, and even our own government uses that as a weapon to cancel out the First Amendment. Yeah. Say, oh, you can't say that. We're not going to send you any more money. The money's to bribe you to do what we tell you to do. And you can't come along here and say that both sides have to be looked at. Look at both sides of the argument. So all we can do is give our little voice out there, and maybe someone will hear it.
And thankfully, there are the Jewish groups that are speaking out, and they certainly don't want to have this in their name. Who would? No normal person would want it.
There might be 50, I don't know how many, but at least more than 10 different groups that were well-known Jewish groups. Yeah. And they were saying enough is enough. Yeah.
The House will vote Monday on H.R. 867, the IGO Anti-Boycott Act, sponsored by Representative Mike Lawmup. Fines up to $1 million, 20 years in the slammer for Americans who participate in boycotts of Israel or its settlements if these boycotts are endorsed by international bodies like the UN or EU. Marjorie Taylor Greene said, I will be voting no. It's my job to defend Americans' rights to buy or boycott whomever they choose without the government harshly fining them or imprisoning them. But what I don't understand is why we are voting on a bill on behalf of other countries and not the president's executive orders that are for our country. Absolutely well said, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene.
One thing authoritarians and dictatorship cannot stand is the truth. So I see all these battles throughout all of history, a battle between truth and people who are nihilists and they don't believe in truth. Yeah. It isn't like they're just making a mistake. Oh, a little white lie here. Hell, it's for their benefit. They argue. It's the fact that they have no respect for anybody who would dedicate themselves for telling the truth, because it muddies the water. It slows things up. It puts a dent, and people start challenging the dictators, because that's what they are. They're always good people trying trying to use their authority to take care of us, make us safe, make us secure, and people roll over because what do? They get the people dependent. And they start at an early age. That is why the Department of Education and the takeover of education was not a very good idea. And that's been going on longer than the Department of Education. That's been going on for 100 years or more. And people become very dependent, and they're fortified by the intellectuals in the community. And they say, this is the best thing we can do. We live in a free country, and look at what we can give our people. Robbery and killing. Oh, my.
Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. I thought that this proposed legislation, it's Tuesday, and the vote was supposed to happen yesterday. It's been postponed. This proposed legislation that would fine and even jail American citizens for boycotting products and companies in Israel. I thought that was the most insane thing I've ever heard. Is that possibly constitutional?
It's not constitutional. I mean, I think it's a violation, at least of the First Amendment. What was it? Citizens United decided that spending money was free speech, that was speech. But it's deeper than that. It's not about political advertising. It's about, can you be compelled to use your money to support or not support other countries? It seems pretty ridiculous. Now, the bill that we would have voted on this week actually just expands a law that already exists, and it's existed since 2018. It was snuck into the National Defense Authorization Act. And you have to be really careful about the NDAA because they put lots of stuff in there that's not germane, because that's one of those bills like the omnibus or whatever that they know is going to pass every year. So they put stuff in that bill. So
can't vote against it. You're un-American if you do.
Oh, well, if you vote against it, then you didn't want the soldiers to get a pay raise.
Right.
What kind of commie are you? So, and that's the ad that they'll run. You voted against a pay raise for the soldiers. But inside of that bill, they made 20 years in prison up to or $1 million fine if you participated in a boycott that some other foreign country initiated against one of our friendly countries. Well, this bill we were going to vote on this week would have expanded that to say if an IGO like the United Nations has a boycott and that an American citizen participates in that boycott, that they could be fined or imprisoned. But how do you know you're participating in that boycott? Maybe you're just exercising your own discretion and saying, I don't like products from this country, or I'm not going to buy a product from this country because they're bombing another country. That's your freedom. How you spend your money is you're free to do. Now, I got to give a lot of credit to Marjorie Taylor Greene. She came out before I did, saw this coming on the radar and just railed on it on social media.
It was an epic tweet.
It was epic. It had a graphic to go with the epicness, and because everything's a graphic.
Yeah.
And I retweeted it, and there was another congresswoman that joined in, and to my knowledge, there were only 3 of us that were against this vocally, but the leadership saw the writing on the wall, and they pulled the bill this week. So fortunately, we did not expand the unconstitutional law that already exists in a way that would have been really bad. There's a governor's race in New York coming up. And the sponsor of this bill, I'd rather not say his name,
Representative Mike Lawler,
probably wanted to score some points in New York. Although it's ostensibly about Israel, it would score points with the Republican Jewish base or maybe independent Jewish people in New York. And so I think he was rushing to virtue signal. The problem is you could put Americans in jail for 20 years with your virtue signal. At least, thanks to Marjorie and myself, and an army of people on social media who started blowing this thing up before it got to the floor, at least the leadership had the wisdom to get off the train tracks.
Yeah. My initial reaction is, why is Mike Johnson wasting floor time on this garbage when there's actually supposedly a budget process happening? And it turns out that it was far worse than that. But before we get off this topic, wait,
hold on.
Okay.
The goal last week and this week is to waste floor time.
Okay.
You don't understand, Matt. Like the big, beautiful bill is being, the lobbyists are working on this thing behind the scenes, and it's not ready for prime time yet. But we got to act like we're doing something in Congress. So last week, we became the nanny state. We passed 5 new regulations. I can't even remember exactly what they were, all 5 of them. And 2 of them were Democrat-sponsored bills. They all came out of the Energy and Commerce Committee. I'm pretty sure all 5 of them were unconstitutional. I voted against all 5 of them. But I thought in November people voted for less government. And here last week, I called it Nanny State Week in Congress. They thought these weren't that controversial, and then we just march time and get these done while we're waiting for the lobbyists to get done with the big, beautiful bill or whoever's writing it. And then this week is mostly just a waste of time, and they thought, oh, imprisoning Americans for 20 years and $1 million fines would not be controversial. So that was just sort of a time-wasting bill, honestly, so that one member of Congress could get a leg up on a governor's race.
20 years or $1 million.
Or both.
Or both for choosing to not engage in commerce.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
I'm struggling with this. And this was my last question on the subject, because I would assume that the definitions of what is an enemy country endorsing a boycott and what is non-commerce that's illegal, is this all subject to interpretation by the Department of Justice? Like who gets to decide?
It gives broad discretion to the executive, the president. It might not always be this president. It's not always going to be this president. He's got, 3 years and 8 months in office, and then he's term limited. And at which point this bill still is active. So it's at the discretion of the executive branch, and then also at the discretion of the judicial branch, because these aren't tightly defined terms.
I have this wild idea. I haven't yet gotten anyone to take the bet, but I have this idea that someday a Democrat will sit in the White House. Someday. I don't know when. Maybe.
Whoa, I don't know if that will ever happen, Matt. Is there any precedent for that?
I don't know. And we're creating all these extraordinary executive powers. It's great. What could go wrong?
Nothing.
The one thing we're not doing is seeming to move forward on actual budgets and legislation that would implement the DOGE proposals. One of the things that I've been really excited about, I know you've been excited about it, and I'm wondering where we are on that, because we were, you guys against your vote passed a budget resolution, and then you passed another CR, and I didn't see any of the DOGE and that stuff. But I assume the appropriations bills are slaving away to get these done. Pardon my sarcasm.
No, yeah, it's warranted. Well, and don't forget, Trump has endorsed Lindsey Graham's re-election now, which is interesting to say the least.
Has he endorsed your re-election? I can't remember that.
Well,
part.
Actually, he's endorsed my primary opponent, whoever that might be. He said he
there
would
isn't one
recruit
yet, right?
somebody against me. Yeah, there's nobody serious that's up for the task yet. But I want to cut government. Lindsey Graham wants to fund bigger government. And Trump has endorsed Lindsey Graham, who's for the next war already. I'm against the next war already, regardless of where it is, in both instances. And anyways, that's where we are. We'll have $2 to $3.5 trillion deficits over the next 10 years. And what's going to happen, we won't have to wait 10 years to see the maleffects of that. What we will see is that the people who buy our debt are going to say, you're not serious. And you're a risk, especially when they see us defaulting to countries like Russia, who have bought our debt. The next country we might default to is China, and the president would have some good excuse for doing that. But if we start not paying our debt to anybody, and we want to borrow more money, and by the way, these sovereign funds of foreign countries are buying less and less of it. It's more, I believe, institutional investors in the United States who are buying the debt. You're going to see the rates go up, and we could enter into this runaway condition where we just can't borrow enough money to service the debt. And if we're not the world's reserve currency, then we can't just inflate our money, dilute our money, and charge the rest of the world for, using inflation. It's going to be a bad situation. And so people are, I do have people telling me, they've got my personal cell phone number. They probably texted me during the show saying, support the president. We don't care, whatever he wants. And I'm trying to tell them that the combination of things that Congress, which is the House and the Senate, are doing that look like it supports the president, will cause the rational people in this equation, the people who are buying our debt, to take a second look and raise the price that we buy debt at. And it's not going to be good for this country. So that's my main objection to what's coming up in this reconciliation package, which covers the mandatory spending. And then the discretionary spending is going to be bad too. They're talking about going from like a $850 billion military budget to $1 trillion military budget. We're not at war.
Is that the reward for not passing an audit? What is the logic on this?
Who knows where all this money is going?
Yeah.
It's not going to pay the soldiers or give them better benefits. It's going to military contractors, and who knows where it's going.
Certainly Waltz was found out. I think he was known to be this already, but he was certainly exposed as somebody working for Netanyahu, basically, more than he was working for Donald Trump, more than he was certainly working for the American people. So, we see this on many fronts. And the last act that Waltz did, even after his Signal chat invitation to, Jeffrey Goldberg, was to appoint Merav Sarin, the talked about last time, as the Israel-Iran desk in the National Security Council, and she needs to go. She needs to be sent back where she came from, in whatever think tank it was. You can look at her biography, and it shows no expertise in Israel or Iran. Her expertise is not in these particular areas of foreign or security policy vis-a-vis Iran and Israel. That is not her expertise. Her qualification is that she is a Zionist. Okay, and she's well connected. That's what Waltz left them with, and that needs to be corrected, because that was also part of the war against really American people, and certainly against that part of Donald Trump that puts America first, because there is still a part of Donald Trump that puts America first.
So you have the neocons and the realists. I'm going to use the John Mearsheimer phrase to describe people who recognize the sovereignty of other countries and the legitimate security needs of other countries and the moral obligation to leave them alone. The neocons, of course, want to expand American hegemony and force feed an American version of democracy down the throats of people as disparate as Iraq and Afghanistan. However, are there any non-Zionists? Is there anybody in that crew arguing this is genocide? Is the word genocide permitted to be spoken in the White House? Does Donald Trump see pictures of babies without arms and legs because of what the IDF has done? Babies.
He has seen pictures of what the Hamas did not do. He's seen false pictures. He's seen the dramatization of October 7th repeatedly presented to him by Israel and by Netanyahu, by some of the neoconservatives in his administration. He has seen those images, but no, there's no advocate for the population in Gaza. There's no advocate there in his administration at all. The realists are not advocates for Gaza. Vance is advocating, let's just take care of America. Let's pull back where we don't need to be. Let's not engage in, kind of a George Washington advice. That's all Vance is doing. Vance is not advocating. The most powerful or realist in the administration, none of those people are advocating for Gaza, because they really shouldn't be. We shouldn't be concerned at all about what is happening over there. Instead of,
we shouldn't be funding it. It wouldn't be happening if we weren't funding it.
That's the point. You know what? That is exactly true. This genocide, which we can't say the word genocide, this genocide is funded almost entirely by American taxpayers. They don't approve of it. They don't want it. It's overwhelmingly unpopular in this country. We think it's terrible. But even a very small percentage of the population is advocating for the dismantlement and depopulation of Gaza. But we, in fact, are paying for it. We have been paying for it. We paid for it during the Biden administration as well. In fact, people are somehow surprised to find out that Joe Biden never actually requested that Netanyahu take it easy on the Gazans. He just sent more money, as we have done, as Trump has continued to do.
The fact is that Putin is a war criminal. He's killed thousands and thousands of people. And he has made one thing clear. He wants to reestablish what was part of the Soviet Empire, not just a piece. He wants all of Ukraine. That's what he wants. And then you think he'll stop there? Do you think he'll stop when if he takes Ukraine? What do you think happens to Poland? What do you think of Belarus? What do you think happens to those NATO countries?
Should have never happened. I will have that war settled between Putin and Zelensky as president-elect before I take office on January 20th. I'll have that war settled. People being killed so needlessly, so stupidly, and I will get it settled, and I'll get it settled fast before I take office.
And
Russia will have to give up all of Ukraine, because that's what they want.
All of Ukraine, meaning they wouldn't keep any of the land that they've claimed?
Russia would have to give up all of Ukraine, because what Russia wants is all of Ukraine. And if I didn't get involved, they would be fighting right now for all of Ukraine. Russia doesn't want the strip that they have now. Russia wants all of Ukraine. And if it weren't me, they would keep going.
So, as Tom Woods says, no matter who you vote for president, you end up with John McCain. How do we know what to believe? And how can he possibly say without a scintilla of evidence that Putin wants all of Ukraine? He said it to her 4 times. You can see how stunned she was when he said it the first time.
Yeah. Well, he's repeating what apparently the people are telling him, the current people are telling him. And I think when he was on the campaign trail, 2 things factored in. One was he was spending a lot of time with Vance, with JD Vance and Vance's people. And that helped him learn for the first time, I think, what was going on in foreign policy, because he wasn't paying a huge amount of attention to that. I don't think he ever did. So he had that input at that time. And now the people who know, the people who want him to, they know you get around the president and you be the last guy to talk to him, and you encourage that. You encourage other people who are talking to him to say the same message. It's an influence game. And so we didn't elect all these other people around Trump, but they are there. And clearly they are influencing him because he's a flawed individual. He is the John McCain that we elected every time we elect. Trump is a people person. I mean, we know that from his campaign and from everything we've observed about him. He works with human beings and he trusts people. He chooses the winners around him and he chooses the losers. It's all about people. It's not about principle. It's not about logic. It's not about a foreign policy like realism. It's not even about neoconservatism, which has an agenda. It's not about the agenda. It's about the people with him. And I think that this actually puts the neoconservatives, it puts the Zionists, it puts other folks that would like to influence Trump at a disadvantage because he is unusual in this way. You can't just put a guy in the right position who gives a briefing to him every day and think that that's going to work with Trump. Now, again, who is he listening to? Clearly, again, not being principle driven, not having a principle driven philosophy about foreign policy or about domestic policy. That puts Trump and the whole country at a huge disadvantage. It's a real problem. If Trump is talked into engaging in a war for Israel, and this would be one more additional war for Israel against Iran, I think that he would be pulled back from that, either by Vance or by not Hegseth as much, but the people in the Pentagon who understand this would be an expensive and humiliating defeat for the United States and would put us on our heels for every other aspect of world influence and domestic improvement that Trump wants to do. So I have to think that we would not do that. But again, I'm not talking to Trump. I don't get to whisper.
God, how I wish you were that blonde-haired lady that he listens to, as
I wish I was too.
As opposed to that pastor whose name we don't know. Karen, thank you very much.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
In this edition, the economic update. All right, the economic update. We're writing about not only how the market's gone up after the Liberation Day and why they're going down and where they're going to go, but we have an article, War Drums Beating. On Sunday, the Houthis attacked a missile strike near the airport in Ben Gurion Airport in Israel. Today, Israel bombs away over Yemen, blowing the place up. They said they totally closed down their airport, military bases, on and on. Dozens of Israeli warplanes conducted airstrikes as the Yemeni Air Force escalated operations in response to foreign aggression and Israeli crimes against Palestine. That's from ISNA. That's their language, the Iranian news agency. The New Arab reported. Plumes of thick black smoke were seen bellowing from the airport in Yemen. And then Trump says he's going to cut back the bombing with Yemen, and there's going to be a peace deal. Yemen's saying no. Meanwhile, India's bombing Pakistan. This is from India issues statement confirming missile attack on Pakistan. Indian armed forces launched Operation Sindoor, hitting terrorist infrastructure. That's the language that the Indian. Everybody they fight against is a terrorist in any country. And then Pakistan says they're going to retaliate. And then Ukraine war. Their bombs away. As we said they're going to do, they're shooting deeper into Russia and going into Moscow. And they say they're killing people over there and they're shooting down drones coming in. We said Ukraine is going to escalate this war along with the European Union. It goes back to why gold prices are going up. Opportunity misses those who view the world through the eyes of their profession. The people in the economic end don't know dick about shit what's going on politically. All they do is swallow the fucking crap spewing out of the mainstream media's mouths. You want to read your economic update and market overview. U.S. manufacturing contracts. You want the trade deficit popping up again. From luxury items to Burger King to a McDonald's, sales going down. The fish rots from the head down. The head down, we're giving you all the facts that you need to know. Geopolitics, trends in cryptos. Again, we outline that military minerals deal rather with Washington and Ukraine. It's a military minerals deal. That's all it adds up to. And World War III, global military spending in 2024 sees steepest rise since the end of the Cold War. Can you imagine? They're ramping us up for war. all over Europe and around the world. Again, what's going on, this is really important, what's going on between India and Pakistan. And again, we've been writing about this in your Trends Journal as it began several weeks ago. We got all the facts there. So this is not new news. It's an escalation of what we said was going to happen. We had forecast that this was going to go on, and it is. UK joins US target practice on civilians in Yemen. Yep. These are the most critical times of my lifetime, and I've been at this for 45 years. What's going on in gold is a story that should be headline news every day. It's going up because of socioeconomic and geopolitical conditions we've never seen before. And now, by the way, both India and Pakistan are nuclear countries. Yeah. And maniacs in charge. You know, you got it. So you better watch out. And again, the war between Yemen and Israel really heating up. Israel is going to do something to drag the United States into a war against Iran. This stuff is very serious. We need peace on earth. We need peace on earth. Oh, the Pope is going to play, Trump is going to play the Pope. Look what religion you're talking about. What religion you're talking about? You got that costume on? Well, you mean the one about thou shalt not kill or steal other people's land? It's a freak show. And by the deeds, the freaks are running the show.
Talked about like that's just been, utterly disappointing about this administration. But it's like, oh yeah, that's right. The goddamn government commits so many crimes. I almost forget about really major ones. It was just when you asked me to rattle off the crimes, I'm like, okay, well, they lied us into several wars and they instituted totalitarian lockdowns. They covered up a giant pedophile ring. They framed the president for treason. And then you're like, oh yeah, and the biggest act of environmental terrorism in human history. That's right. There's that other one that they did. And then literally this happens 2.5 years ago. The Nord Stream pipeline gets blown up. Joe Biden is on record having threatened to destroy the pipeline. It's clearly got the West's fingerprints all over it. And they tried to tell you that Vladimir Putin blew up his own pipeline, which he built, and he can just turn off. Like, he doesn't have to blow it up. Blowing it up, just all it does is not give him the option to turn it back on. And so this question is asked. And then, look, what do you get from Donald Trump here? He asked the question, are you going to launch an investigation? And Donald Trump goes, well, I wouldn't even need to launch an investigation. I could probably just tell some people and then tell you. A lot of people know. A lot of people know who did it. Translation, no. There won't be an investigation. Donald Trump, what is this? A lot of people know. I could just ask them and then tell them. It's, yeah, could you do that? Would you mind? Can we do that right now? Can you call? Do you have your cell phone on you? Can you call them right now and ask them? How? Why? It's so funny. The level of if you think about all the projection from the corporate media, who was like, if Donald Trump gets in there, he might prosecute his political opponents. And, that while they were doing the same thing to him, and how much was made over him having that lock her up chant back in 2016. But then you sit the reality. It's just unbelievable. It's like, here's the funhouse mirror version. And then the reality is them going hey, how about this very specific blatant crime that was committed by the previous administration who supposedly's guts you hate? You want to tell us about that? And it's like, no interest. And then, of course, he pivots into this nonsense about how he was really the one who blew it up, as if that's a good thing, because he got them to stop, he got Germany and Russia to stop
they should
trading.
have blown it up, but I would have blown it up better. Believe me.
It's also it's such a weird, the Nord Stream pipeline's a particularly interesting issue because it exposes how people think about the world. And, there is, what's his name? The Stratford guy, I think his name is Freeman. He was the head of Stratford for a while, but he basically what he said, which is kind of an interesting theory, is that he was the entire motivation for U.S. foreign policy post World War II was to always keep the Germans. It was always to keep the Russians out and to keep the Germans down, and that essentially the big fear from the American empire is that Germany and Russia would get together. If they, this was obviously the big fear right before World War II was that, oh my God, what if Stalin and Hitler, which is kind of interesting. There's a lot of interesting nuggets about World War II. Hitler had a real affinity for the British Empire earlier in his life. Obviously they ended up going to war, but he had a lot of respect for the British Empire. He had a deal worked out with Stalin at one point. And you have imperialist Britain, capitalist America, communist Russia, and fascist Germany. And it's not so clear where the partnerships would end up. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like such a given that the capitalists and the communists ought to be friends. And you could make a lot of arguments that fascism is a lot closer to the system of communism than capitalism is. And anyway, so it's just, it's like you could see where, okay, the team of, you know, Britain, US, and Russia ends up defeating the Nazis and their allies, Italy and Japan and them. But like, oh my God, if Hitler and Stalin had gotten together, who's to say who wins that? You know what I mean? Like it's not a given. And basically what Friedman was arguing was that like there is the concern from the American empire was like, if you ever combined the natural resources and the human capital, like the sheer size of Russia and number of people with like German ingenuity, this could pose a real threat.
I'm going to fucking burn these people to the ground, their families, everything. And it's like, you know what? Maybe that's not the best course of action. Maybe I can use this as a teaching moment. And like, before people just are like, fuck the Jews or any group and the hate, let's try to like turn a hideous incident into maybe a learning experience, as cliche and very unlike me. But I talked to both the culprits who I know are super involved in it, talk to the families. I'm sending these kids to Auschwitz. They've agreed to go. That's, of course, the Holocaust concentration camp.
It's too much to bear, Rob. It's too much to bear. First off, can I just say, like,
funny. It started off like Sesame Street. I'm going to teach them a lesson. Then I got to get on a flight and go visit Auschwitz.
First of all, I will say, like, I understand.
That's so brutal.
Clearly, I just want to make it clear for any people out there that Dave Portnoy is talking about the museum that is currently at Auschwitz, but there is something about I'm going to send them to Auschwitz that still rings very Nazi-like to me, to be like, that's the appropriate punishment. I'm going to send them to Auschwitz. It just kind of comes up. It's not
like, if you just told me I had to go touch the floor of Germany and come back, even that's punishment. But I have to go all the way to Germany and visit the site of horrible humanity. Oh, that's so brutal. And then,
Dude,
also, you can't even get through it by cracking jokes, which is, I personally, there was once a school trip that was doing, I was like, I can't go. I'll just be cracking jokes the whole time. This is not for me. I'm not mature enough, nor do I want to process any, and then one of the rabbis were even like, why go visit God's devastation? But that's just such a, like, that's almost the worst part, is having to go and be respectful the whole time. If you're some dickbag kid from Philadelphia who showed up to a bar with the fuck the Jew sign, and now you got to go and spend 4 days pretending to be I wonder if Portnoy goes with them also and chaperones it.
Dude, well, so here's the funny thing, right? And you could end this video. We don't have to play any more of it. But so this is the funniest thing too, is that, so I don't know where the saga's at now, but the next video after this, like his third emergency press conference, is that they've gone dark on him. Like, they just stopped responding after he was like, you have to go to Auschwitz. So they're like, they're just like, go to fucking Auschwitz. What are you talking about, dude?
It's such a funny thing of wealthy people doling out punishments, where it's like your parents would give you a timeout, but a guy who can pay to send you on a ticket will mandate that you go take a tour of Auschwitz.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says,
I don't know. It seems it might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials. We have thousands of people that are some murderers and some drug dealers and some of the worst people on earth, some of the worst, most dangerous people on earth. And I was elected to get them the hell out of here, and the courts are holding me from doing it.
But even given those numbers that you're talking about, don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said. What you said is not what I heard the Supreme Court said. They have a different interpretation.
Arguably the most curious and terrifying statement ever made by an American president in public in the modern era. He just took an oath. He's taken this oath twice to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And he says, I don't know. I'll have to check with my lawyers. I can't even imagine what his political game is by trying to make a statement like that. He's obliged to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution as the Supreme Court interprets it, not as he wants it to be.
Well, what he said, I'm not a lawyer, I got my lawyers after. What are you talking about? What kind of crap is that? Do I have to abide? You have to ask your lawyer if you have to abide by the Constitution. It's his attitude of cover of the Trends Journal this week.
Well, I was just thinking the same thing. That cover manifests Trump's attitude. Nothing is above or below ridicule. and he will do anything to advance the perception of him as an all-powerful individual.
Yep. So this article you have, again, it goes beyond Trump, and it goes what they've been doing to us all along. Here's the first line. Among the lesser-known holes in the Constitution cut by the Patriot Act of 2001 was the destruction of the wall between federal law enforcement and federal spies. The wall was erected in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978.
The Patriot Act allows one FBI agent to authorize another FBI agent to conduct a search, even though the Fourth Amendment says only judges can authorize searches, and they must be on the basis of probable cause of crime presented to the judge under oath. And the instrument of authorization, the warrant, must specifically describe the place to be searched or the person or thing to be seized. I'm quoting from the Fourth Amendment directly. The Patriot Act purports to do away with all that. Before the Patriot Act, if there was a wall, I'll tell you what I mean by that, between intelligence community and law enforcement. So if intelligence is spying, lawful or unlawful, and it comes across evidence of crimes, with the wall, it can't tell the law enforcement community because they can't use evidence that was obtained unlawfully in court. After the Patriot Act under George Bush and Dick Cheney, and with no debate in the House of Representatives whatsoever, the wall came tumbling down, and the intelligence community was required to share what it found with law enforcement. Fast forward to today, and the FBI fully admits when it can't get a search warrant because it doesn't have probable cause of crime, it simply goes to its cousins in the CIA, the NSA, the DIA, whatever you want. There's 17 of them, and asks them to do the spying, and then that's how the FBI gets their evidence. Unlawfully, unconstitutionally, but regularly, consistently, systematically, and admitted in a 906-page report, which is what provoked me to write this piece.
And again, you know, it's one after another. NSA, Homeland Security. What a bunch of waste of money. They don't, Homeland Security. That's another one that was invented with the Patriot Act. There was no Homeland Security before 9/11.
That's a George Bush concoction. There are about 8,000 FBI agents. There are 160,000 NSA agents who wear khaki pants and black shirts, just like Benito Mussolini's crew did after World War I. And when they arrest you, they don't show badges or guns. They wear masks. This is America. This is Donald Trump's America. And you know, the original Patriot Act, which allowed one FBI agent to sign off on a warrant for another. They called them national security letters, but it was an agent-generated warrant. Made it a crime for you to tell anyone that you received the warrant. You couldn't tell your spouse in the bedroom, a priest in confessional. You couldn't tell your lawyer in his or her office. You couldn't even tell a federal judge in a courtroom until 5 federal judges found that unconstitutional, and the Congress finally removed the thou shalt not tell from the Patriot Act. So what we do when the FBI comes calling with an agent-written search warrant, you can now tell somebody that you got one.
Wow.
That's how bad things are. From time to time, I feel the need to remind people of this. That what provoked me to write this column, a lot of it is history. What provoked me is that it's going on now. And Donald Trump, who was personally victimized by all this spying in 2015 and 2016, hasn't changed anything. He could change this with a phone call, and he hasn't. Well, listen, the Israeli government and its American allies have captured the American government. Our mutual friend, whom you and I admire deeply, who's on my podcast at 3:00 this afternoon Eastern, Phil Giraldi, is the country's foremost authority on this. And his latest piece on the United States of Israel is actually captivating and terrifying. Captivating and terrifying. He opines that Trump is afraid to tell Netanyahu to go fly a kite, that he can't stand him, that he will visit indignities on him, like when Trump announced yesterday that the Houthis had capitulated. It's nonsense. But he did announce that we have capitulated, that we have stopped bombing them. Thanks be to God. He didn't tell Netanyahu first, and Netanyahu apparently was, completely flummoxed that he learned about this by watching it on CNN. So Trump will do things like that because he can't stand the Israeli prime minister. But he'll still give him the billions in military equipment to slaughter innocents that he requests, because that is a spigot Trump is afraid, according to Phil, to turn off.
Well, again, look at the money he got from Adelson's, hundreds of millions of dollars. moved the embassy from Jerusalem from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, told Israel, that land you stole from the Syrians and the Golan Heights, it's yours.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think Trump will stop the Yemen war. I think he'll keep going with it.
Oh, I think you're right. Oh, and our friend Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, announced yesterday no more communication with Hamas or the PLO with the American embassy. We don't even care what you have to say. Take your complaints elsewhere. Mike is a Christian nationalist who is deeply devoted to the cause of slaughtering Palestinians. This will really get under your skin, Gerald, particularly because of the front cover of the Journal for this week. Mike is also a Protestant minister.
I know.
A Protestant Christian minister now doing everything he can to facilitate the slaughter of innocents.
What a bunch of
pictures of babies without arms and legs doesn't seem to affect this Protestant minister.
Oh, what was his daughter? Was the mouthpiece for Trump for a while, wasn't it?
Right. She's now the governor of Arkansas.
Can you imagine? You look at these clowns. Look at these clowns. Oh, I'm a minister. You're a piece of scum. What Christ do you believe in? Hey, you're an expert at all this stuff. How about thou shalt not kill, fat face? Huckleberry. How about this one? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. What's the matter, Huckleberry? That's in your Bible. What a bunch of phonies. Throwing this religious crap out. Shove it. You have nothing to do with the Christ that you say you believe in.
I'm sorry to say that I agree with you. Unfortunately, there are millions who follow this nonsense. Millions. These are the people that elected Trump. These are the people that applaud what he does. These are the people that run the Congress. These are the people that look the other way when babies are blown up. When anybody is blown up.
So the Israeli military has listed the return of the remaining Israeli captives in Gaza as its least important goal in its plans for an escalated assault on the Strip. And this was reported by Haaretz on Wednesday. So according to the report, retrieving the hostages was placed last in a list of 6 objectives. And those 6 objectives include number 1, defeating Hamas. Number 2, operational control over the territory, which means full military occupation. Number 3, demilitarizing the territory. Number 4, striking Hamas government targets. Number 5, concentrating and moving the population. And number 6, the last goal, the least important goal, is returning the captive. News of the Israeli military's goals comes after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu admitted that retrieving the hostages was not his priority. And this is something that's been clear for a very long time, but it has not been explicitly stated by Netanyahu until last week. So the Israeli military finalized plans for the expanded offensive dubbed Gideon's Chariot on Tuesday and Wednesday after the government approved the escalation. The purpose of the expanded assault is to achieve the full military occupation of Gaza and concentrate the entire civilian population into a tiny area of southern Gaza with the goal of forcing them to leave to achieve ethnic cleansing. The inclusion of concentrating and moving the population as the 5th goal in the Israeli military's list, I mean, that makes clear that ethnic cleansing is a higher priority than getting the hostages out. So, and I think this has been clear for a long time, and this is what the Israeli government wants to do. And I think, the reason why I wanted to make this the top story, I just think this is important for just because the narrative that you still see, I mean, in the U.S. and from Israel supporters is, just release the hostages, as if this has been about the hostages anytime recently. I mean, if it was about the hostages, Israel would have implemented the full ceasefire deal to get them all out, or would have accepted Hamas's offer that they would release all the hostages at once for a permanent ceasefire deal. But it's very clearly not about the hostages. And I just put in this quote from Smotrich, what he said the other day, and he seems to be very influential in drafting these plans. He said, quote, "The Gazan citizens will be concentrated in the south. They will be totally despairing, understanding that there is no hope and nothing to look for in Gaza, and will be looking for relocation to begin a new life in other places," end quote. So President Trump on Tuesday, actually he said this on Wednesday, I need to fix that. He commended the Houthis for their resilience under U.S. attacks. He said, quote, "We take their word for it. We hit them very hard. They had a great capacity to withstand punishment. You could say there's a lot of bravery there," end quote. So as I've been, discussing a lot, the important thing to understand is that, this probably could have been accomplished, a ceasefire with the Houthis without the U.S. even bombing Yemen. they won't stop their attacks on Israel and on Israeli shipping, the blockade on Israeli shipping. But on April 10th, Dropsite News published a report, an interview with a senior Ansar Allah official who said, we would be willing to stop attacking U.S. warships if the U.S. stops bombing Yemen. And Dropsite reported on Wednesday that a source told them that the interview was noted at high levels within the Trump administration. So that interview that they published could have played a role in the ceasefire, in the U.S. agreeing to the ceasefire. So good for them for, being one of the few outlets that interviews, that'll do interviews like that, because it does make a difference. So this is an update on the India-Pakistan situation, which is not looking good. So India's missile strikes on Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir have killed at least 31 people, including one child. And now the two nuclear-armed powers appear to be on the brink of a major war. So India claimed that it targeted terror camps linked to the April 22nd terrorist attack in the Pahalgam area of India-administered Kashmir. Islamabad has denied that it had any role in the attack and said that India's missile strike hit civilian areas. They're saying that all the victims, all the dead were civilians. Pakistan has claimed that it shot down 5 Indian fighter jets and drones, and there appeared to have been some evidence of that they shot down the fighter jets. And there's been heavy shelling across the line of control, which is the de facto border between the Pakistani and Indian sides of Kashmir. According to Indian officials, Pakistani shelling has killed 7 civilians on the Indian side of Kashmir. Pakistan is expected to launch a more significant response in the coming days. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said, quote, Pakistan has every right to give a robust response to this act of war imposed by India, and a strong response is indeed being given, end quote. Pakistan's defense minister warned of the risk of nuclear escalation and said, quote, if India pushes the region toward nuclear war, it will bear the full consequences, end quote. So Indian officials are warning that New Delhi will respond to any kind of retaliation from Pakistan. So there's a big risk of escalation here. It looks like Pakistan is going to do something beyond just the shelling across the line of control. And the question is, I think the big risk, India seems like they're itching for a fight. So, this might not make a difference. But I think if Pakistan, if they launch an attack in Kashmir, in Indian administered Kashmir, there's less of a risk of escalation if they launch an attack on India. But again, it does seem like India is just ready to go here. So it's just not looking good here. And this is the deepest attack that India has launched into Pakistan since 1971, before either country had an arsenal of nuclear weapons. So again, this is very significant, what's happening here. And I'll keep a close eye on it. I feel like I kind of dropped the ball on following this after the terrorist attack and the tensions rising. But now I really hope they come back from the brink here. Oof. So Vice President J.D. Vance said on Wednesday that negotiations between the U.S. and Iran are on the right pathway, although he repeated a false claim that no other country in the world besides Iran has a nuclear enrichment program without a nuclear weapons program. And this is a talking point first used by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So several non-nuclear armed states that are signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty enrich uranium at low levels, including Japan, Germany, and Brazil, and also the Netherlands. I think Argentina. I'm not positive about Argentina. But he said at the Munich Leader Conference in Washington, quote, let me ask this basic question. Which regime in the world has a civil nuclear power and enrichment without having a nuclear weapon? And the answer is no one, end quote. And that's just not true. Again, this is just a false claim that they're putting out there. So Vance, on one hand here, he's saying that there's progress being made in the talks. He didn't explicitly say that Iran needs to end its enrichment program, but that seems to be what he's hinting at here by making this point. It's kind of a mixed bag, but he also repeated the threat, basically referred to Trump's threat that if there is no deal reached between the U.S. and Iran, then the U.S. is going to attack Iran. So that's not good. This one's from Middle East Eye. Israel is poised to move forward with a highly contentious settler project east of Jerusalem that would effectively divide the occupied West Bank into two, according to Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich. And he said this is how they will effectively kill the Palestinian state. Those are Smotrich's words. And the project known as the E1 plan would involve the construction of 3,412 housing units for Israeli settlers on occupied Palestinian land. It aims to connect several settlements with occupied East Jerusalem, cutting off Palestinian communities from one another and significantly disrupting territorial continuity. The plan would isolate East Jerusalem from the West Bank, forcing Palestinians to take lengthy detours to travel between cities and towns while enabling further expansion of Israeli settlements. So they want to make life as difficult as possible for the Palestinians, cut them off from each other. And as Smotrich said, the plan here is to kill the Palestinian state. And this has always been the plan, the purpose of advancing these settlements. But now they just say it. They're just saying it outright. And Smotrich, he's not just the finance minister. He also has a ministry position in the defense ministry where he could advance settlements. He's essentially the occupation governor of the West Bank, and he's a West Bank settler himself. And he has long been on the record saying, that Israel's got to annex Gaza. He wants to, expel the Palestinians from the West Bank. So this is all moving along.
It's today's Run Your Mouth.
People try and tell you what you gotta do. Don't listen to them unless you think it's true. Follow your heart and your dreams. Follow your heart and your dreams.
I'm basically reading articles that are insinuating that the Obama deal was pretty good and that Trump is basically trying to re-put together the Obama deal. I don't know enough about this. Why don't you let people know, one, what the Obama deal was, two, if the Obama deal was good, three, if the Trump version is any different than that, and four, does he actually get a deal done, or does this escalate to the war that Israel desperately wants?
I think the U.S. in a way got a really good deal with the initial Iran deal, because we just took sanctions off of them and they agreed to additional limits on their nuclear program. Trump comes into office, and in 2018 he withdraws from that agreement, even though Iran is in full compliance with it. There's no doubts about it whatsoever. Iran's in full compliance. They've done everything they've needed to do, and the U.S. left the deal and reimposed sanctions. Trump saying we need a tougher, a stronger deal because it only addressed Iran's nuclear program. It didn't put limits on their missile program, on their ties with other groups in the Middle East, like the Shia militias of Iraq and Syria, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen. And so because it didn't do those things, Trump said it was a bad deal. Now, Biden, at the start of his administration, attempted to negotiate to re-enter the deal. And what happened was Israel started carrying out assassinations in Iran, drone attacks inside Iran. They seized over a dozen Iranian ships in the Red and the Mediterranean seas. And I think a large part, these Israeli provocations made it so that the talks really never went forward. And of course, Biden didn't put very much effort into it in that time anyways. So during the Biden administration, the relationship with Iran just kind of continued to move downward, just at a slower pace than during the Trump administration. So now Trump comes into office, and Robbie, the American intelligence community is saying, and has been saying for 2 decades, that Iran is not trying to build a nuclear bomb. But Trump comes into office saying, we can't allow the Iranians to get a nuclear bomb. His director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, is saying the Iranians aren't trying to get a nuclear bomb, yet he's saying we have to prevent the Iranians from getting a nuclear bomb. And so now he's entered into these talks with the Iranians, and the problem is the Iranians gave up everything they were willing and could possibly give up during the negotiations with Obama for the JCPOA. But Donald Trump is Mr. Art of the Deal, so he has to have a tougher and a better deal than Obama did, and is trying to say that the Iranians could have no nuclear enrichment whatsoever, which is a red line for Tehran. They're saying that they're not going to agree to a deal there. So ultimately, I don't think any deal gets done between the U.S. and the Iranians during the Trump administration. I also don't think we end up going to war with Iran during the Trump administration. For all of his blustering and for all the reporting we're getting that Netanyahu wants to go to war with Iran, I'm highly skeptical of this. Netanyahu's main goal is creating greater Israel. That means annexing Gaza, annexing the West Bank, kicking Hezbollah out of southern Lebanon, and taking southern Syria, which he is well on his way to doing. However, the Israeli military is stretched. They've just called up tens of thousands of reservists. Many are refusing to report to duty because they've already served for hundreds of days since October 7th. They're burnt out. They're tired of Netanyahu. And Iran isn't doing a damn thing to interfere with Israel, bombing Syria every day, bombing Lebanon every day. Gaza, they've more or less announced that they're annexing and kicking the Palestinians out. Bezalel Smotrich said they're going to be confined to a small area. That's the finance minister, the Israeli finance minister. The Palestinians in Gaza will be confined to a small area, and then they'll be slowly removed to third countries. Israel has created an office within their defense ministry dedicated just to resettling Palestinians outside of Gaza. They actually have an official government office for that. And so if Iran isn't interfering with Israel, when Israel is going to create greater Israel, they're going to annex Gaza and the West Bank. Netanyahu going and picking a fight with Iran is probably the one thing that could screw up his plan at this point. And really, I think achieving what his life goal has been, to take Gaza and the West Bank from the Palestinians. And as evil as I think Netanyahu is a horrible, deplorable man. But I don't think he's stupid either. I think he's extremely cunning, extremely smart. And that's why he's so dangerous. And that's why I don't think we're going to war with Iran. And it's just going to be the Israelis focusing on the countries I mentioned. And one of the reasons, Robbie, I'm almost positive that Israel is going to kick the Palestinians out of Gaza is that there are now between 4,000 and 8,000 unexploded Israeli bombs all over the ground in Gaza. And what Israel has found since October 7th is that most Hamas munitions come from dud Israeli bombs. And so while they've, made do with a few dozen bombs over the years to create hundreds of rockets and RPGs and other things that have inflicted real losses on Israel since October 7th, the number of munitions that will be available to them after this are absolutely massive. And Hamas still has its strength of 40,000 fighters. That's according to U.S. and Israeli intelligence, and most of their tunnel network still intact.
So after all these efforts, they're basically, because I wasn't sure about that 40,000 number. I'd said it on part of the problem, but I just wasn't sure about it. So according to your calculations, they're basically back. Military speaking, they have the same amount of members, and from tunnel network, which was, part of this stated was we have to weaken Hamas. So they're still standing at 40,000 plus 80% of their tunnel network now, plus potential munitions because of things that did not explode when Israel dropped them.
Yes. Yep. All that. And I think I've read the Israeli intelligence put the tunnel network between like 2/3 and 75% still intact. And the 40,000 fighters number comes from a member of the Israeli Knesset.
So in other words, for all of the operations and death in the area, the stated goal of trying to uproot Hamas thus far, if they were to stop today, Hamas is it in a stronger place than it was? It's basically in the same place. Like, I'm just saying the stated goal of uprooting Hamas, Israel has not really come close to achieving that goal as of yet.
Yeah, I would assume that they're in a stronger position, or at least would be within a few months once, they have time to send out their teams to retrieve the bombs and break them down into rockets and things like that.
The Peter Schiff Show.
He said inflation's in great shape. He said, employment's in great shape. The economy's in great shape. Everything's in great shape, right? Well, the interesting thing is, in their official statement that it's written, and they put that out, right? One of the lines they added that was not there the last time is that the Fed added that the risks to higher inflation and higher unemployment have risen. So it's not either or, it's both. So the Fed is correctly, right, it finally got something right, although it's not even a risk. As far as I'm concerned, it's a foregone conclusion. But the Fed said that the risk is that we have higher inflation and we have higher unemployment. The Fed admitted that the risks are rising for both simultaneously. So in other words, the risks of stagflation, because unemployment is going to rise because of a weak economy. And either the increase in unemployment causes the recession or the recession is caused by the rise in unemployment. But either way, Powell is describing elevated stagflation risks. That sounds like the farthest thing from a great place, especially since the Fed really doesn't have a plan for stagflation, although now it claims that it has a plan, right? The plan that it has now is to figure out which one of its mandates is farther away from where it's supposed to be and then focus on that one. But I don't even know how they do that. I mean, how do you tell? Let's say unemployment goes up to 6% and, where it is now in the 4s. But if inflation goes up to 4 or 5, I mean, which mandate are they farther away from? I mean, it seems like they're about the same. I don't know how you know which problem is worse, the inflation problem or the unemployment problem. I mean, they may be equally as bad. So I don't think the Fed's plan is going to work, especially, and Powell had to reluctantly acknowledge this, but whichever mandate it chooses to focus on, right? So if the Fed decides unemployment is the bigger problem than inflation, even though inflation is a problem, if they try to solve the unemployment problem by cutting rates or doing QE, they make an already bad inflation problem worse. And what if making the inflation problem worse actually undermines the economy and causes unemployment to go up, even though that's the mandate they're pursuing? Conversely, right, if they end up saying inflation is the bigger problem than unemployment, and they jack up interest rates to fight inflation, well, now unemployment goes up. And now that might be the bigger problem. So what do? Just back and forth? Every time they fight one problem, they make the other problem worse. And then they have to turn their attention to the problem they just worsened and then make the other one worse again, right? There is no way out of it when you're in this situation, because none of this has ever worked, because the Fed was always able to get away with creating inflation to solve problems or to pretend to solve problems. It was really just sweeping them under a rug, but it's not going to be able to get away with it anymore. I believe that, the Fed is going to ultimately decide that it's the labor market and the economy that need help. Inflation be damned. But it's going to backfire, right? It's going to weaken the economy further and create even more unemployment as the inflation rate is rising. So it's a no-win situation that's coming up. I mean, it really, if you read between the lines of what Powell was saying, especially in the Q&A, he really was saying, we're screwed, right? Because he knows that the economy is weakening. That's why he's saying the risks to unemployment have risen, but he's not cutting rates. Why is he not cutting rates? Because the risks of inflation are going up. So he's in a bad position. He's telling us that. And the fact of the matter is, the Fed should be hiking rates. That's what $3,400 gold is telling you. That's what this massive credit expansion is telling you. But the Fed won't raise rates, because if they raise rates, they'll cause a financial crisis. So they can't cut rates, right? They can't raise them. So they're leaving them the same, just like a deer in a headlight. But that strategy is not going to work, right? They're too scared to do anything because they can't do anything. So they're trapped. And so if you read between the lines, you'll realize how screwed we are. But all this negative talk about China, oh, China's a disaster, China's falling apart. China is where you want to invest money. China is a great opportunity. Unfortunately, probably a lot of Americans can't invest in China. But I think the return on Chinese investments are going to dwarf the return on U.S. investments. You know, I hear all these people too, and Kudlow again on Today, and everybody keeps saying, China is our enemy. China is our enemy, right? They're our biggest enemy. Oh yeah, they're our biggest enemy. They're our biggest supplier of consumer manufactured goods and our biggest creditor, our biggest lender. So does that sound like an enemy? Does an enemy give you all the stuff that you need and then loan you the money to buy it? I mean, how is that the action of an enemy? I mean, look, they've been bombing us, right? Those bastards, right? The Chinese have been bombing us with consumer electronics and furniture and appliances and beauty care products and pharmaceuticals and, you know, office products and stationery and sporting goods and toys and you name it. They've been dropping these bombs of consumer goods, like carpet bombing the whole country with all this stuff, right? Right? That's our enemy. No, they haven't been our enemy. We're our enemy. America's number one enemy economically and politically is not Beijing. It's Washington, D.C. And even now, even with Donald Trump there, China has been one of the main reasons that we have not had to suffer the consequences of our profligacy. They have provided the subsidy. They have taken the bullet for us. They've absorbed our inflation. They've produced what we don't. They've loaned what we don't save, right? So we've been relying on China. But, you know, China has been reluctant to cut ties. Well, we've cut them. And so I think that maybe the Chinese recognize, you know what, now or never, right? There's no sense in trying to repair this relationship because we recognize how vulnerable we are now. We can't, be beholden to this relationship with the U.S. The sooner that we can move past this and get rid of these trade surpluses, the better. And the way to get rid of the trade surplus is to stop selling stuff to America and sell it to somebody else or consume it yourself. And that means allowing their own currency to rise, allowing their own interest rates to rise. China can afford to suck it up and take the pain to get the long-term gain. The amount of pain that we're going to have to suffer is much worse. And unfortunately, I don't know that we're going to get the gain because I don't know that we're going to pursue the right economic policies. A congressman, I forget his name, asked Scott Bessent a very simple question. Who pays tariffs? That's the question. Who pays tariffs? Now, the answer is actually very simple, right? Tariffs are paid by an importer, and then the importer passes the cost on to the customer in the price, right? So a tariff is an indirect tax that consumers pay when they buy products. It's indirect because the consumer doesn't send the money directly to the government. The importer sends the money to the government and then collects it from the consumer. That's what it is. It's a very simple tax, right? The founding fathers understood it. They put it in the Constitution. They didn't have to explain what it was. Everybody has always known, even before we had public schools or, when people didn't even graduate high school. The average Americans, everybody knew what a tariff was and who paid the tariff, right? Very simple. I think Scott Bessent is actually a smart guy. I think he knows exactly who pays these tariffs. That's why he couldn't answer the question, because he couldn't think of a plausible lie. He was kind of stuck because, again, either he's that dumb, right, which I don't believe, but, that's how he looks, and he's our Secretary of the Treasury. Just looking at that, you'd want to dump your treasuries, right, if you owned them. But what's more likely is that he was just trying to come up with a completely BS explanation on the fly, and he wasn't able to think of one because he knows how ridiculous it is. Now, why didn't Scott Bessent want to answer that question? Because if he answered the question, he would contradict his boss. He would have to say that the consumer pays the tariffs. The congressman knew the answer. That's why he asked the question. And Bessett knew the answer. That's why he didn't answer the question, because Trump's been telling everybody foreigners pay the tariffs. It's external revenue, right? That's BS. And I've been saying that all along. And Scott Bessett knows it's BS. That's why he couldn't come up with an answer to a very simple question. Now, one of the things that Trump talked about, the woman who was interviewing him said, oh, are you going to make some cuts to Medicare? Are you going to cut something? And he's like, no, absolutely not. We're not cutting anything. He said, we're not going to cut Medicare. We're not going to cut Social Security. We're not going to cut Medicaid. No, they're not. Not only are they not cutting it, all that stuff is increasing. Government spending is increasing. Donald Trump is going to break his own record as the biggest deficit spender, although actually Biden already broke Trump's record. So Trump is going to break Biden's record. But I think that Trump will run up more debt during this 4-year term than Obama did during his entire 8 years. That's how bad the deficit spending is going to be. And that's basically what Trump admitted during this interview. Because after he said, we're not going to cut Medicare, we're not going to cut Medicaid, we're not going to cut Social Security, so we're not going to cut anything. All we're going to cut is waste, fraud, and abuse, because nobody minds that. See, that's the problem. In order to be a good president and make America great, Trump has to be willing to cut stuff where people mind, right? If you're only going to cut things where nobody minds, you're not going to cut anything, because there's always going to be somebody that minds. And in fact, waste, fraud, and abuse, that actually minds too. You can talk about cutting waste, fraud, and abuse in the abstract. But the minute you identify the abuse or the fraud, now you've ruffled feathers. Now you've got people say, oh, no, don't cut that. Oh, I need that. That's why this whole Doge, I said this from the beginning. Yeah, they're making some cuts, but they amount to nothing. If you asked a candidate or a president, excuse me, sir, would you be in favor of cutting waste, fraud, and abuse? Sure. I mean, who's going to say no? Yes, I'm in favor of fraud. I want more fraud. Or we want more waste. I'm in favor of the government wasting money. Nobody is going to say that. Yeah, no one's going to say, oh, I want to cut Social Security. I want to cut Medicare. I want to cut defense. But sure, I'll cut waste. I'll cut fraud, right? So what Trump is promising to do is not new. This is not revolutionary. This is what everybody has promised. But the problem is nobody delivers. Now, maybe Trump will cut a little more waste, fraud, and abuse than his predecessors, but it's not going to matter, because what we need to cut is the stuff that he won't touch, because he knows somebody is going to mind. Another ridiculous thing that Trump said, because he was asked if he was going to provide some kind of tariff relief for small businesses, right? And Trump said, no, because they're not going to need any relief. He said that small businesses are going to be making so much money because they're going to be building their products in America. So they're not going to need any relief. They're going to get rich making stuff in America. No, they're not. The reason they're not making stuff in America right now is because they can't afford it. If they made the stuff in America, it would be so expensive, their customers couldn't afford it. So the reason these small businesses are in business is because they're able to manufacture stuff in China. Now, when they can't do that anymore because of the 145% tariff, they are out of business. But it shows you how out of touch Donald Trump is when he doesn't even realize how many businesses are going to go out of business because he's cut off all their supply. And he's saying, oh, they're going to be rich. They're just going to make the stuff here. No, they're not. How are they going to do that? With what factories? With what supply chains? With what workers? This is all a pipe dream. I don't know who is blowing all this smoke, up the president's butt. But this is ridiculous. But it seems like he actually believes this. I mean, watching his expression. So he is in for a huge surprise when we get a string of bankruptcies of small businesses from these tariffs. Probably the most ridiculous thing, though, that the president said this week wasn't even during that interview. It was on a post on Truth Social. Out of the blue, Trump posts, I'm going to impose 100% tariff on movies filmed outside the United States. 100% tariff, right? First of all, the movie industry, Hollywood motion pictures, that's one of our industries that we have a trade surplus. We export a lot more movies than we import. So movies, the motion picture industry, Hollywood entertainment, that is not a problem that Donald Trump needs to fix. Leave well enough alone. But apparently it bothers Trump that some American companies do some of their filming in Canada, right? Or in Europe, or, in Puerto Rico. Or I guess, Puerto Rico is America, so maybe he doesn't care about that. But there is a lot of on-location filming. Sometimes, we make a movie that's supposed to take place in Europe. We don't have like a big soundstage like we used to, when we had the big movie studios. The unions and the government destroyed that system, which was a great system, and don't have really time to get into that in this podcast. But, so they go off and they film on location, right, to make it look real. But now Trump somehow wants to put a tariff on that. I mean, how do you even do that? Because these are intangibles. Tariffs are taxes that you collect at the border from the importer. Something comes in on a ship, you look at it, you count it up, and you slap on the tariff. I mean, the only way you can have a tariff on movies is if we're importing DVDs, right, coming in from China or something. Then you can tariff them at the port. But how do you tariff the movie? You can't even do it. I mean, Trump doesn't even understand. He says that tariffs are his favorite word in the English language. Yeah, it's his favorite word because he doesn't even know what it means. He doesn't understand it. You can't put a tariff on that. I mean, you could try to put some kind of federal excise tax on movies, at the theatrical level, like movie theaters. You could say, hey, you got to pay this federal tax. If you're going to show a movie that was a foreign film, you got to charge everybody double, right? So if it's $20 for the movie and you want to screen a foreign movie, well, it's $40. You're going to collect a $20 federal tax from the moviegoer. I mean, who the hell's going to see the foreign movie if you have to double the price? I mean, I don't even see those movies anyway. But that wouldn't be a tariff. It would just be a federal excise tax, like a sales tax on movies. But there's no way. I mean, I don't know. The president must have woke up and got this crazy idea that he's going to tariff movies. Like he could just tariff whatever he wants, right? That's just his weapon. Tariff, 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 tariff. And I'm going to make America great again with these tariffs.
He went to X and he said, this wasn't widely covered in the news, so I will tell you. Congress was scheduled to vote on rescissions this week to cut the waste that Doge found, but the votes were quietly canceled. USAID and other programs like PBS and NPR were to be targeted. So apparently they had identified some of these things and they were going to actually cut. And according to Thomas Massie, they decided to not do that. Now, he took to Grok, the AI component of X, and he asked Grok a question about this, and Grok churned out a few bits of info. I'll go to the next one. This is interesting, and it's also revealing, even though it's Grok, which seems pretty accurate, and it does cite the sources there. You see that little P on the bottom, that's Politico. So Grok says, in early 2025, House Republican leaders tentatively plan to vote on a rescissions package proposed by President Donald Trump during the week of May 5th, 2025. That is this week. The package, expected to be sent to Congress in April 25, aimed to cancel $9.3 billion in previously approved funding. So that's the point. Previously approved, previously appropriated funding. It was to cut that, primarily targeting foreign aid programs, the State Department, and the public broadcasting entities like PBS and NPR. And certainly those first two are pretty popular. I mean, Americans don't like foreign aid. They just don't. PBS and NPR is a little bit more divisive. I think the left tends to like it. The right tends to hate it. Nevertheless, keep that up if you will, please. The rescissions process, governed by the Impound Control Act of 74, that was a whole Nixon thing, allows the president to propose canceling appropriated funds, which Congress must approve within 45 days of continuous session via a simple majority vote in both chambers. This fast-track procedure was seen as a way to formalize spending cuts, particularly those pushed by the Trump administration's Department of Government Efficiency led by Musk. So the initiative, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but it's important here, I think. So the initiative comes from the president and it goes to Congress, and they have this time to make these cuts, to vote on these cuts. Now go to the next one after this. So Grok continues on, why didn't it happen? What happened? And this is their analysis, and they cite their sources there on the bottom. You'll recognize some of this stuff here. Political opposition and lack of consensus. Now here we go. Once the smoke is cleared, once they have members have basked in the glory of, hugging Musk and being popular along with Musk, because on their own, guess what? They're not very popular. Once that clears, now it gets back to the business of making the sausage. And that means don't upset the apple cart. Okay. So here's what Grok says. The resistance package faced significant resistance from both Democrats and moderate Republicans. Democrats argued that the executive branch was overstepping its authority by attempting to rescind funds appropriated by Congress. We've already talked about how they can fix that, viewing it as an infringement of the legislative branch power of the purse. Now, I highlighted this part. Moderate Republicans and defense hawks expressed concerns about cuts to foreign aid, particularly after the controversial shuttering of USAID, which had already strained international relations. I know, Grok, where are you getting this? But whatever. Additionally, some GOP senators were wary of publicly associating themselves with unpopular cuts. There you have it, especially after the 2018 recessions that narrowly failed. They didn't want to be blamed if they failed. They didn't want to be associated with them if they became unpopular, which is certainly very possible given the media's coverage of it. And definitely the military hawks, the people who maintaining the global empire, did not want any of these cuts to foreign aid or USAID. Now, the problem is when you've retained that funding for USAID and it continues to function as an entity within the State Department, they can continue to do things. Now, Marco Rubio, everyone watching this show knows, is no angel. He may be behaving himself a little bit right now when he's working for Trump, but in his heart, he's a neocon and he's always supported the global American empire. And so he's got that money just banging around, and he's got people around him thinking about what to do with it. It's like putting a big old cookie jar in front of your toddler. They're going to eat it. That's just how it works. So until you cut that money and say, nope, it's got to go back, it's vulnerable right there. And that's what's going to happen. It's going to be hidden and nobody's going to know. It actually may turn out to be worse than before because under USAID, there was some accountability because they did, at least for a while. I think they stopped doing it recently, but they did have to announce the different grants that they gave. So at least you know where the money was going. Now you won't have that. So go to the next one here on this rescission. The other problem is White House hesitation and strategic shifts. Again, this is what happens when the momentum slows. The momentum was there in March and April to get this done, but it slows. They wake up with a hangover, right? They were drunk on the excitement of cutting government because that's what Americans wanted and voted for. Well, they woke up with a hangover and they said, well, God, we don't want to do this. This is no fun. The summary of the grok, again, as I was mentioning, the grok that Thomas Massie put up last night on his X account. In summary, while the rescissions vote was scheduled for early May 2025, it did not happen due to a combination of political opposition, historical caution from the failed 18 attempt, White House reluctance, legal and public backlash against DOJ's cuts, and competing legislative priorities, i.e. the big, beautiful spending bill. 100%, everything, everyone gets a pony in the big, beautiful bill. Posts on X also noted significant Republican discontent with the proposed cuts, suggesting the package ran into a buzzsaw of opposition from both House and Senate Republicans, further undermining his chances. That's it, because that's the currency of D.C. is money. Money is being stolen from us. That's what keeps them alive. That's what flows through their veins. And when they lose money, they lose power. If you cut these agencies, they lose power. They lose patronage, right? So that's what happens. So anyway, that's what Massie claimed yesterday. I tend to believe him. He's never led me astray before. I think he's right. He may have got some small details wrong, but I think he's right. And so the Gateway Pundit, which is a right-wing, I believe, a website. Now they ran with this last night, and here's what they put up. And they got some pushback. Thomas Massie accuses Speaker Johnson of canceling rescission's vote that would have slashed $9.3 billion in wasteful spending. Johnson's office denies the allegations. Who do you believe in those two pictures? I don't know. Who knows? Who knows what happened? But something was supposed to happen this week, and it didn't. And I think the main point is that every day, every week this doesn't happen is a week that it becomes less likely to happen. They're going to wait this out, guys. They're going to wait it out because people will lose interest. They will look at the next shiny object that the media waves in front of them. And before you know it, business as usual, big, beautiful bill, fully funding everything. Now, I've got one other post here on X. Now, this is from Senator Paul sounding the alarm bells on this. Senator Paul said on April 10th, I wholeheartedly support the cuts President Trump, Elon Musk, Doge have put forward. And this is prophetic, but if the cuts are real, why does the bill, this is the one we're talking about, the big, beautiful bill, why does the bill expand our debt by $5 trillion? Congress math, once again, does not add up. GOP holdouts block action.
If government has a ton of power to violate your rights, and they just choose not to use that power, well, you're not really free. You're living in a state of luck, at best. Only when they try to violate your rights, violate their constitution, the constitution given to them, and they can't get away with it, that's what freedom is all about to the founding generation. That's the test. Not whether politicians sound good or if they mean well, but whether they're stopped dead in their tracks as soon as they try to violate the rules given to them. Now, back in 1723, John Trenchard of Cato's Letters, writing in letter number 115, he spelled it out with no apology. He said, only the checks put upon magistrates make nations free, and only the want or the lack of such checks makes them slaves. And from there, he made the line even clearer. It all comes down to who sets the rules, because if government sets the rules for government, government will never have any limit to the powers that it gives itself. He said they are free where their magistrates are confined within certain bounds set them by the people, and act by rules prescribed them by the people. And they are slaves, where their magistrates choose their own rules and follow their lust and humors. If you're like me, anytime I do one of these episodes, you're always thinking, sure sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, let's move forward to 1748 and the celebrated Montesquieu, as James Madison referred to him. Well, he laid out the blueprint in the spirit of laws. He said, to prevent this abuse, it is necessary from the very nature of things that power should be a check to power. But let's get one more thing straight here. The core problem isn't necessarily government itself. It really gets down to human nature and the nature of power. And that's how Thomas Gordon put it in Cato's letters, number 33 in 1721. He wrote, considering what sort of a creature man is, it is scarce possible to put him under too many restraints when he is possessed of great power. So the more power that he has, the more you have to have limitations on his power. It's better to have him have way less power, of course. But Gordon continued, he may possibly use it well, but they act most prudently who, supposing that he would use it ill, enclose him within certain bounds and make it terrible to him to exceed them. So you always have to start out with the assumption that those in power will always try to expand their power. We all know the old phrase, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, but it's not just about the corruption, although exercising power is not delegated. Usurpation of power is a form of corruption, but we also have to understand that power always seeks to expand, and anyone who has it will always try to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. So you not only have to give them very clear and strict limits, but you have to make it terrible to exceed those limits. Now, keep in mind that putting those limits on paper, that's one part of the equation. And a lot of people seem to think like, oh, we just need to, fix the words on paper or get the right words on paper and everything will be better. We stayed with previous words on paper and things would have been way better. But the founding generation repeatedly warned us about relying on what they called parchment barriers. That's what James Madison specifically called it in Federalist number 48. They warned us that constitutions, words on paper, don't enforce themselves. They never did, and they never will. Here's how Roger Sherman explained it. He said, no Bill of Rights ever yet bound the supreme power longer than the honeymoon of a new married couple, unless the rulers were interested in preserving the rights. So if it's not in their interest, if they can get away with doing stuff that violates rights, we all understand that they're going to get away with doing whatever they want to get away with. They don't care. And Sherman was absolutely right. Paper does not bind people with power. It's not about trying to get words on paper to magically do what they've never done in history, what they will never do in the future, and that is enforce themselves. It's also not about begging government to stop doing what government was never authorized to do in the first place. That's a population on its knees begging for scraps. Instead, it's the duty of the people to protect and defend their own constitution, whether the government likes it or not. And as James Iredell, one of the first associate justices of the Supreme Court, made it clear, this is the only way to get it done. He said, the only resource against usurpation is the inherent right of the people to prevent its exercise. And man, there is so much to unpack in just that one short statement. But here's a few important points. First of all, it's not something to try later on. It's not something to try after everything else fails. It's the only resource. The only resource against usurpation. Usurpation is an exercise of power not authorized by the Constitution. Basically, stealing power, theft of power from the sovereign people of the several states. So the only way to deal with unconstitutional acts is the inherent right of the people. In other words, it doesn't need to be written down anywhere. The people don't need permission from constitutions or from government because they're the top of the food chain. And it's their inherent natural right to prevent a violation of the rules that they have given to their agent. So the only resource against usurpation is the inherent right of the people to prevent its exercise. I covered this in much more detail, and I think one of my most important episodes ever, which I did a couple of months ago, how the founders explained this actual and unwritten enforcement mechanism for the Constitution, how to enforce the Constitution, whether the government likes it or not. That'll be linked to in the show notes. We publish a blog post a couple of hours after the live stream is done over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. It's all spelled out. Alan Mosley will get that organized, and in it, you're going to find a show links section where it includes all the stuff that I'm mentioning, all the reference links and source documents that I'm referencing in this show. Again, 10th Amendment Center, Path to Liberty. But that brings us back full circle to the brutal truth. Even if government doesn't abuse their power, as long as they have the power to abuse you, to violate your liberty, you're not actually free. At best, you're just lucky. St. George Tucker, in view of the Constitution of the United States, he put it like this: it is the due restraint and not the moderation of rulers that constitutes a state of liberty, as the power to oppress, though never exercised, does a state of slavery.
You tell Ukrainians, look, this is one of those things that's going to be evolving over time. And if you do a ceasefire in place, the ground that you own, the ground that you fought for, that's your ground right now. What happens 5 or 10 years down the line is different. And you don't have to basically freeze everything in place. Right. And we've got that right now. The Ukrainians are willing to do a freeze in place, what I call a ceasefire in place. And then we'll, for a period of time, they're willing to set up a militarized zone. What they basically said is, we'll back up 15 kilometers, you back up 15 kilometers to the Russians. So, you know, it's a 30-kilometer, 18-mile zone that you can actually observe. And you can actually say, okay, are there any intrusions? And you've got what's called the coalition of the willing. That's the British, the French, the Germans, plus right now at least another 12 other countries are willing to put forces in an air cap west of the Dnieper River, not east. That's going to be a ceasefire force to actually slow this thing down. And if you get to 30 days, John, I really believe this. You get to a 30-day ceasefire, it'll get extended. And it is so hard to do this when you're a military guy, is to restart a conflict. And I don't think they will.
The straight, General, the Russians who will not accept NATO in Ukraine will accept Western peacekeepers from 12 different countries in Ukraine. Larry, you can't make this stuff up.
He negated it the moment he started with those forces. I mean, the man has to be certifiable. I add him to the category of enough. You've given insanity its due. There's no way Russia's going to accept that. And I don't blame them a bit, given the record that we have of duplicity and nefariousness.
Colonel, who's winning the special military operation militarily, Russia or Ukraine?
Russia, devastatingly so. So devastatingly so that, as Clausewitz warns again and again, war has its own momentum. You let it go and stop trying to fix it, as it were, and that momentum is going to have its own purpose eventually. And that purpose might be to hell with you and all of your people, like just watching her, van der Leyen, a preposterous speech, as if she were king of the world and dictating to that world. You take those people and throw them all together, and Putin doesn't have really much incentive to listen to any of them and just go on with the special military operation until he's sitting at the border of NATO formally.
Go back and read The Art of the Deal. You know, when he said would be willing to walk away from a bad situation. And I think he's just telling both sides that. But the ones who are going to be hurt by that are not the Ukrainians, it's going to be the Russians, because the Russians are not winning this war. If they're winning the war, they'd be on the western side of the Dnieper River. They're not. If they're winning this war, they'd be in Kyiv. They're not. They'd be in Odessa, and they're not. They wouldn't have lost combined forces. When you talk about it with industrial strength killing, the losses are over 1 million killed and wounded on both sides. And so when people say he's winning the war, if he just comes to an agreement right now, ceasefire in place, I think then he said, okay, he's kind of accomplished everything that he may want to, and just step back from that.
What do you think, Colonel? I mean, I don't know how much more criticism we can level at him. His premises are so far from reality.
He doesn't want to be on the other side of the Dnieper. He doesn't want to go to Kyiv. He doesn't want to take the entire country. My God, just think. Netanyahu's got his own mess brewing right now that's fierce, this sustained military operation. That's why Sharon withdrew in 2005. That's exactly what Putin would be doing, a sustained military operation amongst a bunch of partisans and guerrillas who are fierce. If he tried to take the whole country, he would rue the day he did it. So he doesn't want to do it. It's preposterous. This general is smoking some really cheap material.
Why would Donald Trump manifest an unrealistic view of history at the time that these people are celebrating and Witkoff is negotiating?
I think because he doesn't have any view whatsoever of history that's even anywhere near accurate. Now, I can go back to my previous supposition. It's frayed now, really frayed, but he's trying to build pressure. He thinks he's doing a deal here, a real estate deal, and he's trying to build pressure. And the lies and the half-truths add to that pressure because Putin doesn't know whether he believes them or not, nor does anyone else. So he's confusing the table, if you will, on which he's dealing. But I'm really, really skeptical of that now. It looks more like a circus to me than it does a deal.
Did we cut a deal with the Houthis, and who prevailed? Pepe Escobar is saying the Houthis prevailed because they haven't been degraded, they haven't been restrained, and we wasted $1 billion and lost 3 F-18s in the process.
And Reapers galore. That's at 30 million apiece. That's probably a part of the reason, if not a large part of the reason, that Donald Trump did what he did, whether they agreed or not, because we're losing too much ordnance and too much money.
And what did we gain by this mini war? I say mini, people died, and we spent $1 billion, but it only lasted about a month and a half in Yemen.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Judge, we have gained nothing since we started helping Saudi Arabia and the Emirates originally years ago in a frustrated effort to put the Houthis back in their place, as Mohammed bin Salman said. And they never did, and no one has, and I suspect no one's going to.
Do you think that Trump is sick and tired of Netanyahu?
I do, and I watch his behavior, his mannerisms. I think he is, and he's searching for a way to do something about that, but he simply has no conception of how to do it because he's so beholden to all the different wickets that the Israel lobby, as Mearsheimer calls it, exercises. And he's also concerned about what's going to happen in the Levant should Israel go down. And therefore, he's got no reason whatsoever to do anything to do that.
What do you think would happen militarily if Trump listens to Lindsey Graham and strikes Iran with the Israelis?
I think Iran will go all in and respond with everything they've got and respond all over the region. So we will have a burning Saudi Arabia and the oil facilities. We will have a destroyed El Udeid in Qatar. We'll have probably a destroyed military city where a lot of U.S. assets are in Saudi Arabia. We'll have a destroyed Fifth Fleet headquarters, the largest fleet headquarters we have now in Bahrain. We'll probably have a reception and ongoing procedure complex in Kuwait destroyed. Everything the U.S. has on the ground in the Middle East will be destroyed. And Israel will be destroyed, in my view. And Iran will make it existential for themselves if they have to.
If you look at Pakistan from northeast to southwest, their east-west depth, they do not have the strategic depth to absorb our strike. All their major cities, population centers, they are all within this small little strip of land. Our depth is so much when Pakistan strikes, we'll be able to absorb that strike because, of course, there will be damage. But when we go back with a massive strike, which is our declared policy, and unacceptable damage, Pakistan will cease to exist.
Is this going to get out of hand?
I heard that same kind of language from similar people in 2002, from the ISI on the Pakistani side, not from the civilians, but from the ISI and the military, and from the military on the Indian side. The Indians sort of got their rear end handed to them when Pakistani F-16s shot most of their aircraft out of the sky because the F-16s are such better aircraft than the Indians had. And the pilots, I think, were better. What he's saying is kind of like what Mao Zedong said when he talked about deterrence. I'll destroy Los Angeles and Houston and New York and maybe some other U.S. cities, and maybe you'll get Shanghai and maybe a little bit of Beijing, whatever. I'll still have 800 million people left, and you'll be virtually destroyed. That's the kind of threat he's making. Now, if he means it, he's a fool. If he's just saying it, I can understand that he would be doing that because there's a lot of tension between those two countries, and it's really bitter and passionate tension. I got news for him on another thing, though. If we fire, as we told Islamabad and Delhi in 2002, if we fire 100 nuclear weapons, and we thought they would probably expend their arsenals eventually, because that's what escalation theory teaches us. As long as you can shoot, you're going to shoot. And if they are really devastating you, you're going to shoot everything because you don't want to lose it. You wipe both countries out virtually because Pakistan's stockpile is pretty extensive. And you probably, according to studies that have been done, eliminate agriculture, for example, in the middle of the United States between the Mississippi and the Rockies for about 5 to 10 years because of the nuclear winter you create because of the upward atmosphere moving those clouds of nuclear waste over to us. So this is not just localized like he was trying to hint. This is global. And he better watch out what he's talking about. I hope he's just, a military guy let out there like a bulldog, like a Doberman Pinscher to threaten. The Indians do that. So do the Pacs. This is backdropped by something else, Judge. And the floods in Pakistan made this quite apparent. The Himalayan glaciers, because of the climate crisis, are melting, and they're melting much more rapidly than many experts thought they were going to. That's what caused the flood in Pakistan that flooded about a third of the country. What's happening now is Pakistan is corralling that water now as best they can and is threatening to build dams on the river and ultimately to deprive the entire western part of India of any water of consequence. Oh. So this is much bigger than just the fracas in Kashmir.
So dozens of community kitchens in Gaza shut down on Thursday after running out of supplies due to the total Israeli blockade on the Palestinian territory, which is starving millions of civilians. Amjad al-Shawa, director of the Palestinian Non-Governmental Organizations Network in Gaza, told Reuters that the majority of the 170 community kitchens in Gaza have already shut down, and the few remaining will soon run out of supplies. Just a day earlier, as I covered yesterday, the World Central Kitchen, a U.S.-based charity, announced that it was forced to halt operations in Gaza. Shawa said, quote, "Everyone in Gaza today is hungry. The world must act now to save the people here. The remaining kitchens will be closing soon. The hunger catastrophe is beyond words. People are losing their lone source of food," end quote. Shawa said that people had relied on the community kitchens for 1.5 meals per day, but in recent weeks, it was cut down to one single meal. Palestinians who are able to cook for themselves are forced to use expired and contaminated flour. Babies have been suffering and some have died of malnutrition since their mothers are struggling to produce breast milk, and Israel is blocking the entry of baby formula. It's a blockade on everything. So Israel first imposed this blockade, the total blockade, on March 2nd, and the collective punishment of Gaza's civilian population has been strongly backed by the U.S. Representative Randy Fine, Republican from Florida, who was recently elected in the House in a special election for Mike Waltz's seat, said in a post on X that Palestinians in Gaza should starve away. Let me read the tweet that he sent here. So this is in response to Rashida Tlaib saying that the government of Israel is starving Gaza to death, saying it's a war crime. And Randy Fine said, "Tell your fellow Muslim terrorists to release the hostages and surrender. Until then, starve away." Hashtag starve away. So the U.S. is no longer demanding that Saudi Arabia normalize relations with Israel to move forward with talks on establishing a Saudi civil nuclear program. And this was reported by Reuters on Thursday. So the Biden administration was working on a potential Israel-Saudi normalization deal that would have involved the U.S. helping the Saudis establish a nuclear program and signing a mutual defense treaty with Riyadh, like a NATO-style alliance with Saudi Arabia. That's what they were working on. And there were reports in September 2023. Again, this is during the Biden administration. There were reports in September 2023 that said Riyadh was willing to drop its long-standing condition that a Palestinian state must be established before it would normalize relations with Israel. What happened then? October 7th happened, and of course everything changed, and Israel unleashed on Gaza. And over the past year and a half, Saudi officials have made clear that there will be no Israel normalization without a Palestinian state. And the idea of a U.S.-Saudi mutual defense treaty has also been dropped, and President Trump is willing to move forward on the nuclear talks without Israel's involvement, according to this Reuters report. According to Israel Hayom, Trump has decided to move forward on the potential Saudi deal without consulting Netanyahu. Israeli officials told the Israeli outlet that they don't think Trump could get support from Congress for a Saudi nuclear program without a normalization agreement. So this is kind of interesting. This is what an Israeli official said. Quote, "The president won't be able to get approval to push forward a civilian nuclear program for Saudi Arabia without the Israeli component. He doesn't have a Senate majority for any agreement that doesn't include Israel or that moves forward without its consent," end quote. Just something to see an Israeli official saying, you know, if he doesn't include Israel, Congress isn't going to support it. And there's another report from Israel Hayom that said Trump is frustrated with Netanyahu over certain issues and is moving to take action without him. And that report cited the Yemen ceasefire, the U.S. Houthi ceasefire, which does not include Israel. And then, so there's actually another report. It was Israel Hayom again, which for people, just for people to understand, this is a Israeli newspaper that's owned by Miriam Adelson. It was owned by Sheldon Adelson, you know, who of course was a big Trump donor. And he died, and now Miriam Adelson has taken over. She gave Trump, I think, like $100 million, reportedly on the condition that he support annexation of the West Bank. So that's the kind of news organization this is. So they had like a few reports about how Trump and Netanyahu are not getting along, about how Trump is doing things without getting Israel's approval. And so it seems like Israeli officials are not happy about this, and they're so they could be trying to shape a narrative here. But there's also another report in Israel Hayom. I only saw it in their Hebrew language site that said Trump is ready to move forward on a Gaza ceasefire deal without Israel. I don't know exactly how that would work, but that might be a sign that maybe Trump's going to put some pressure on Netanyahu for a ceasefire. I don't want to hold out any hope on that, but I mean, I want to have some hope that these atrocities are going to end. But with Biden, it just reminds me there's all these stories about him and Netanyahu not getting along, and a ceasefire coming, and it just never came. But I don't know. Hopefully, I think the way that things could happen is if there is some kind of personal beef between Trump and Netanyahu, just because of the way Trump kind of operates. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to get my hopes up too high.
What is the status of the United States bombing Yemen? Donald Trump claimed that there was some sort of a ceasefire with the Houthis. Our man on the ground, Pepe Escobar, says no such thing at all.
I don't know what to say other than it appears from the media and from what the Trump administration is saying that a deal was cut and that we basically have admitted defeat, that we want to end the bombing of the Houthis. And in return, they're not going to shoot at American ships in the Red Sea.
Yeah, but they're not going to shoot at American ships because they won't be there. There won't be any American ships to shoot at.
Well, I don't know. I think they're talking about ships that are carrying cargo, not necessarily naval ships. I don't know if the naval ships are leaving or not. I mean, one of the problems here is trying to get hard information on exactly what's going on here. If this deal was reached, what ships are they actually not shooting at? They say they're only shooting at Israeli ships. They're only shooting at ships or cargo ships that are headed towards Israel. How can they know that? And so forth and so on. It's just not clear to me. But it is the one thing I think that is clear is that we want to put an end to our fight with the Houthis. And the reason is Trump thought that he could beat the Houthis easily. He thought that Joe Biden was a pussycat. And if Donald Trump, just turned the dogs loose, we'd go in there, finish the Houthis off, and that would be the end of the story. But he found out, Trump did, just like Biden did, and just like the Saudis did before that the Houthis are very difficult to defeat. And we were also, as I've said on a number of occasions, expending huge amounts of ammunition in our fight against the Houthis that was needed for East Asia. And also we were deploying lots of naval assets in the Mediterranean area and in the Red Sea area that needed to be out in East Asia. So this was not a good situation for us. And it's not surprising that Trump is trying to walk away from the war with the Houthis. But again, we don't know exactly what that means.
Larry Johnson, who is one of our go-to military people, and was a fan of yours and was on the show twice a week, has estimated on the basis of research that the United States has spent $1 billion bombing the Houthis. That includes I never heard of this, 2 jet fighters that fell off of the USS Harry Truman, an aircraft carrier in the ocean there. They're worth between $78 and $80 million each. First, have you ever heard of aircraft carrier of jet fighters falling off of aircraft carriers? And secondly, I guess we just wasted $1 billion.
Well, Larry's done some very fine work in this regard, for sure. I would note to you that there was a third F-18 that was lost in a crash. So we've lost 3 F-18s, and we've lost a lot of very expensive Reaper drones. And what happened, I think, with regard to the F-18 that fell off the carrier, or at least one of them, it was making a sharp turn to avoid a Houthi missile that was coming at the carrier. And in the process of making that sharp turn, the F-18 fell off the carrier. I would imagine that in World War II, given the large number of carriers we had and all the carrier battles we fought, that there were more than a few instances where aircraft rolled off the carriers.
I would imagine the captain of the ship is now swabbing the deck, losing an F-18.
And the founders, the old revolutionaries, they openly mocked the idea that opposition to the Tea Act, including the Tea Parties in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and elsewhere, was about the price, the cost of the tax, the amount of the tax. A young Alexander Hamilton addressed this claim in December of 1774. He said, "What then is the subject of our controversy with the mother country? What can actuate those men," he wrote, "who labor to delude any of us into an opinion that the object of contention between the parent state and the colonies is only 3d duty upon tea?" And then once he asked that essential question, basically it was rhetorical for him there, he didn't hold back on the answer. He said the Parliament claims a right to tax us in all cases whatsoever. Its late acts are in virtue of that claim. How ridiculous, he wrote, how ridiculous then is it to affirm that we are quarreling for the trifling sum of 3d a pound on tea, when it is evidently the principle against which we contend. So you were just left with the direct shipping and the trifling sum of 3d a pound on tea. Now, on paper, that probably sounded really great. If you think about it, you want less regulation, less rules about what everyone can do. So you'd have no more British tax on that side, no more middlemen, lower prices for the people. But that was the whole point. They wanted to use lower prices as a tool to manipulate the people into complying with their tax, to assert their power to tax, or to, well, engage in any power, whatever, whatsoever, in all cases whatsoever of the colonies from the Declaratory Act. And that's really what Lord North admitted. And this is from a footnote, an important footnote in Benjamin Franklin's Volume 6. Lord North, this wasn't written by Franklin. This was from the editor, and we do have some quotes here as well. Lord North avowed the object of retaining this 3d tax to be for the purpose of asserting and maintaining the right of Parliament to tax the colonies. He said that, quote, he even wished to have repealed the whole if it could have been done without giving up that absolute right, and that he should, to the last hour of his life, contend for taxing America. So Lord North wasn't messing around. Hey, we can get rid of this tax. That's fine. Not if they think that we're actually getting rid of the power to tax, because for the rest of my life, that's what I'm pushing for, the power to tax the people. Now, the American revolutionaries, they knew this whole thing was a trap. This was pretty obvious to them. They understood, as John Dickinson wrote when the Townshend Acts were first passed in 1767, that this would just be a precedent for more in the future. Again, this is a trifling sum, and he understood that, well, why the heck would they even have such a small duty, such a small tax, if they weren't using it to establish a precedent for future use? And that's exactly how he put it. He said the authors of this law would never have obtained an act to raise so trifling a sum as it must do, had they not intended by it to establish a precedent for future use. And then he hammered it home with this: to console ourselves with the smallness of the duties is to walk deliberately into the snare that is set for us, praising the neatness of the workmanship. And that's exactly how Mercy Otis Warren described it later on in her great History of the American Revolution. She said this inconsiderable duty, again, they all understood that the duty itself was tiny. So why would they be fighting over a small financial amount? It wasn't that, it was the principle. This inconsiderable duty on teas finally became an object of high importance and altercation. It was not the sum, she wrote, but the principle that was contested. It manifestly appeared that this was only a financiering expedient to raise a revenue from the colonies by imperceptible taxes, step by step, precedent by precedent. Expanding power and control is what government does. John Dickinson understood it. Mercy Otis Warren understood it. Even Alexander Hamilton, he probably learned the wrong way on that later on, but as George Washington also understood in a letter to Brian Fairfax, that it was really about the power. He said, "For sir, what is it that we are contending against? Is it against paying the duty on tea because it's burdensome?" Wow, that is a tough word for me. He said, "No, it is the right only. We have all along disputed." And in case anyone thought that an entire continent could be bought off by a cheaper cup of tea, Benjamin Franklin set him straight. He said they have no idea that any people can act from any principle but that of interest. And they believe that 3 pence in a pound of tea, of which one does not drink perhaps 10 pounds in a year, is sufficient to overcome all the patriotism of an American. But of all people that I have read and researched on this particular topic, maybe a bit of a surprise to me when I first found it, no one really hit it harder than Alexander Hamilton, a young, fiery revolutionary. First, he made the British argument here. The British argument was this: our contest with Britain is founded entirely upon the petty duty of 3 pence per pound on East India tea. But he didn't just reject that excuse, he totally buried it. He said, whereas the whole world knows it is built upon this interesting question, whether the inhabitants of Great Britain have a right to dispose of the lives and properties of the inhabitants of America or not. And when news hit the colonies that tea shipments were on the way, the people didn't beg for permission. They didn't have some soft protests or petitions. They drew a hard line. They actually named their enemy. Like these resolutions passed unanimously for the town of Boston, drafted, I believe, by Samuel Adams. Whoever shall directly or indirectly countenance this attempt, or in any wise aid or abet in unloading, receiving, or vending the tea sent, or to be sent out by the East India Company, while it remains subject to the payment of a duty here, is an enemy to America. I mean, that is not holding back at all. Directly or indirectly, supporting or effectuating the Tea Act made you an enemy to America. And Benjamin Rush also totally understood that the real cost was going to be liberty, not just 3 pence per pound. And he was talking about the tea as it was on its way. Should it be landed? It is to be feared it will find its way amongst us. Then, farewell American liberty. We are undone forever. And so he said, we have to oppose the landing of the tea. He said, the baneful chests contain in them a slow poison in a political as well as a physical sense. They contain something worse than death, the seeds of slavery. Now back to Hamilton. Before he fully lit them up, he first gave them a calm reminder of what this was and actually what this wasn't. He said, we neither desire nor endeavor to threaten, bully or frighten any persons into a compliance with our demands. We have no peevish and petulant humors to be submitted to. Then the gloves came off and he started swinging with this. All we aim at is to convince your high and mighty masters of the ministry that we are not such asses as to let them ride us as they please. This was no petition. I mean, really, when you get down to it, it was a warning. And he summed it up with this. We are determined to show them that we know the value of freedom, nor shall their rapacity extort that inestimable jewel from us without a manly and virtuous struggle. The rest, as the old saying goes, is history.
Now everything is guided by and it surrounds the people what to do with the money. And the most visible sign of what they want to do is what the president is arguing with Powell, because Trump says lower interest rates. Well, they usually lower interest rates, when they're in a slump and they admit it. Well, we are, but lowering interest rates is hard. That means more inflation. You can't get lower interest rates without the government buying more treasury bills. So he's really the inflationist here. But the one that, in a very sophisticated manner, Powell, he's the one that raises the interest rates anyway. It keeps them high. And but the one thing is, ultimately, it gets sorted out, and the market will find what real interest rates are. But to get to that point, the economy has to go through some rocky times, and I think that's what we're witnessing today. Chris.
Right, Dr. Paul. We are in a big mess. There's a new face in the White House. It's a familiar face because he was there before, but the mess is still the same and getting bigger. And it's because it's very easy to understand the government is not shrinking. The problem in America is the size and scope of our government. It was supposed to shrink. People voted for it very enthusiastically. I remember all the speeches, Ramaswamy, Elon Musk. It was countless speeches of all the things that were going to happen to get government off our backs. And it's not happening at all. And unfortunately, the most exciting, especially from my perspective, aspect of the second Trump administration was Doge, and that is fading into obscurity. It's because the politicians were never, they like the pictures with Elon Musk that they took, and they liked tweeting how great Doge is. But when it comes to actual, we're going to cut the government, not going to happen. And Thomas Massie was right once again, because he knew it was not going to happen, and he was lambasted on X by the influencers, who are really no different than the people on TV. They're just on X, who said, get on board with the Trump agenda. Anyone who goes against the Trump agenda is going to get steamrolled and primary Thomas Massie. The cuts, the rescissions will come later. You'll see. He was right. They are not coming. Government spending and debt are going to skyrocket even more. So this is the issue that we're in. It's like we were taken once again because government is not shrinking, the troops aren't coming home, the wars aren't ending, and the government is still on our backs. And that's the problem that we face.
Well, that's not too encouraging. And I don't think that's, we're seeing a good diplomacy when it comes to the relationship of the executive branch and the Federal Reserve, which is okay because we shouldn't have the Federal Reserve and we should have an executive branch much smaller in scope that didn't have so much economic authority. I mean, I hear a president can say executive order. Well, I'm going to raise tariffs $10 billion tomorrow on ABC company. And it involves not billions, into the trillions of dollars in trade get affected by this. Over the years, when I talk with the feds, they always said, when I challenged them, why you'd print all this money and buy all this debt, he says, well, it's you guys, it's just the Congress. And he has a point there. And that's a good excuse. Although I think they're in conspiracy. Mm-hmm. I think the big spenders in Congress and very often the executive branch, because all of them want to have war. And that's one of the biggest motivators for this. And the Fed would never hesitate to provide the money to go to Ukraine and the Middle East and Iraq and all these places that we go in, save so many people. Think of Vietnam and all these things. So it's a coalition and it's a conspiracy. Oh, that's horrible. But it's dignified and nobody knows exactly what's going on because it's sort of hidden.
Right, Dr. Paul. You mentioned, yes, that Trump calls Powell a fool. And what Powell does is foolish. It's a fool's errand. He doesn't know what interest rates should be. None of them do. It's arbitrary. They set it based on the goals that they want to achieve, and they hope that they'll achieve the goals by fixing prices. So it's foolish. But at the same time, Trump is being foolish. He's with setting the tariffs. He doesn't know what the tariffs should be. This morning, I wrote Trump, 80% tariffs on China seems right. Well, Why not 76%? Why not 83.2%? It's arbitrary. He doesn't know what tariff rates should be. So this is more central planning. You have one guy fixing interest rates, another guy fixing tariff rates, and neither of them know what either of them should be. So this is more central planning nonsense in our lives that we can do without both of them. And it's a shame because they're both being foolish. And as far as Trump saying that inflation is down and virtually none, that's not in my life. You know, when I go to the supermarket, nothing has come down. I'm paying the same thing for eggs. Now, I'm not everybody, but those are my prices, and I don't see anything coming down. But again, when Biden was in there, he said inflation was 0%. So when you're in there, you could say whatever you want. Just tell people there's no inflation. And many people will just repeat it. There's no inflation. That's what Trump said. So we're in a bind with central planners, Dr. Paul, and they're both being foolish.
That's for sure. You know, I want to quote Powell. He was asked at the question session after the meeting the other day, and they wanted to know, and somebody asked him whether he, Powell, sees a path to a soft landing for the U.S. economy. The Fed chair pointed to the uncertainty surrounding trade deficit. So, the chairman of the Federal Reserve has to be smooth and cool and positive. I have things under control. Yeah, there's a bump in the road, but there'll be a soft landing. We're not going to have engine failure. So he goes on. He says, to explain that position, he says, what looks likely, given the scope and scale of the tariffs, if the tariffs are ultimately put in place at those levels, which we don't know, then we won't see further progress toward our goals. Oh, there's an out already. At least for the next, let's say, year, we would not be making progress toward those goals. That shouldn't reassure the markets. The thing is, we don't know that. Well, that's confession, I would say. There's no such, not much uncertainty about the scale, scope, timing, and persistence of the tariffs. And there is a lot of uncertainty about it, and he's right about that. And I'm sure that the results of the tariff argument has a long way to go. And the one thing is that we have weakened ourselves internationally in our dollar being weakened. We're weakened in our military, and the proposal to compensate for that, especially a weakening of our dollar and a weakening of our military presence, is spend more money. And that's what the real trouble they're having in Congress right now, is trying to cut a couple dollars and cut taxes and then increase spending. And they did cut some in the proposed budget. They did cut some of the proposed increases, but it's just the proposed increases, but they added to the militarism. And they say, well, that's national security. That's our safety. And I say that baloney. I don't believe that it serves as a safety factor for us. I think it serves the benefits of the military industrial complex. And that is what we should be dealing with.